Hello, my name is Paul Reifers. I'm CEO of Episurf Medical, and we are here at the Red Eye studio today for our first ever Capital Markets Day. Some of us were discussing the timing of this, and we figured we should have some more published results before we ran this Capital Markets Day, and all I can say is what a timing. We have a long afternoon ahead of us. You will meet the management team of Episurf. We will have a couple of customers and development partners speak about the Episealer technology, and Anders Hedlund from Red Eye will help us through the day with the Q&A sessions. I will start together with our CFO Veronica Wallin and CEO Katarina Flodström and discuss the corporate aspects of Episurf. Then we have a very interesting clinical section with Professor Peter Imans from Maastricht and Dr. Johannes Holtz from Hamburg, together with Fredrik Zetterberg and Katarina from Episurf. And in the end, we will wrap this up with a very interesting presentation on our latest addition, the Episealer Talus, the ankle implant. And this is presented by Professor van Dijk. And then we will have a Q&A session in the end. I will highlight that we will probably run over a bit, but the presentation will be available afterwards. So please stay with us as long as you can today, but should you have to log off, this will be available again. If you are at home or at the office, you are very welcome to participate through sending questions to our email, ir@episurf.com, or at the event page, and then Anders will try to pick them up. So I will start talking about our strategy and our future opportunities. And we are in the joint preservation business and motion preservation. That is what our customers, the orthopedic surgeons, would like to achieve. We're targeting unmet medical needs of significant size in the orthopedic industry. And this is an evidence-based conservative industry, but make no mistake, it's driven by innovation. And it's a large industry. The orthopedic industry has annual revenues of well over $50 billion, and the knee segment is one of the absolutely biggest ones. The sector is dominated by a few American players, one German and a UK player, and these are all commercial giants. And I'm sure they have excellent business development departments and product development departments, but the innovation in this industry often comes from the small players. Episurf is definitely one of those. Focusing on our first product portfolio, the Episealer knee technology, we are targeting a patient group which are on a path towards developing osteoarthritis in the knee. And this is a problem that doesn't age well. And as the patient gets older and the lesion gets bigger, the osteoarthritis gets worse. And at the right side of this slide, the patient has probably developed full osteoarthritis in the knee. And the treatment of those patients is focusing on knee replacements for the slightly older patients and with the larger lesions. And the younger patients, they are treated with some of the biological interventions that you can try, focusing on cartilage regeneration. But there is a treatment gap here. And in between those two, there's really no gold standard. And why is this a problem? Biological interventions, they rarely work for the slightly older patient, about 35 years and above. And knee replacements, you should only use them for the older patients, maybe 65, and if the lesion is big enough to really justify a knee replacement, which is not often the case. In the middle here, there's an emerging segment within orthopedics of small implants, and Episurf, we're claiming market leadership in this growing and very interesting segment. And these patients, they are in pain. They have big problems in their daily life, and we will listen now to a patient from the UK. He's slightly older than our average patient group. He received what we call a trochlea implant about 2 years ago. And this movie now is definitely an in-house production, so don't bother with the format. But please listen to what he has to say. It's about 2 minutes, and it's quite interesting.
With regard to the knee pain, it came in two forms, really. One was a horrible, dull ache, which would be persistent and all day. And whilst in isolation was bearable, by the end of the day, it wore you down. But then I would have other days when it flared up and the pain was really quite unbearable, to the degree that I had to take painkillers, which is not something that I enjoy, but that was the only way I could get through the worst days. But somehow it was even worse, the constant ache. It was just inhibiting in every way. For instance, I couldn't cross my legs, so I couldn't sit comfortably, something we take for granted. Walking the dogs became a very short walk, not a long walk. Driving the car, obviously again I'm bending the knee, but being silly enough to have a manual car, working the clutch was unbearable. And on at least a couple of occasions I had to stop, get out and let my wife take over. Unfortunately, it even impinged on sleep and was keeping me awake at night because I couldn't get comfortable. When I got comfortable, I woke up and I was in a lot of pain then because I seemed to get comfortable in a bad place. So all in all, it wasn't that it was stopping me doing the obvious things that I love, which is golf. It was just impeding in my daily life, just the day-to-day things that we just do and take for granted.
So this patient, he had what we call a focal lesion. That is a hole in the cartilage, and there's often an underlying bone lesion associated with this problem. The pain is in the bone. There's no pain in the cartilage. The pain is in the bone, and that's often where the problem is. And these lesions, they're often a result of a trauma, maybe in your mid-20s or even before that. And the hole in the cartilage, if left untreated efficiently, the hole gets bigger year after year, and ultimately you're down to what we call bone to bone, and that is extremely painful. And this scenario don't stop here; it continues, and it often ends up in about 2 million cases annually in our target markets with a knee replacement, and as you can see, a very, very big procedure. We are treating these patients with our technology. And instead of using a knee arthroscopy, which is a keyhole surgery where you go in with a camera and you only see the overlaying cartilage, we use our MRI-based technology to assess not only the quality of the cartilage, but also the underlying bone lesion. Following that, we're designing an implant which is patient-specific and fully individualized to each individual patient. And there's no alternative in this business. That's our opinion. A standardized implant would not fit the unique anatomy of each patient, and given the pressure you have on your knee joint, it has to have a perfect curvature. And you can also look at the depth of the implant. We design it so that it considers the underlying bone lesion. Following that, the surgery, we use patient-specific and individualized surgical tools to achieve an optimal result in the OR, meaning that we are achieving the optimal positioning, angulation, and the depth of the actual implant, also crucial in this instance. The implant is coated with hydroxyapatite and titanium, so it grows into the bone, and we don't have a single case of implant loosening. And the implant is made of one piece of cobalt chromium. That's a well-known prosthesis material. It works, and this piece will not break down. And the alternative is freehand surgery of a standardized implant. It does not work, in our opinion, in these situations. And this has been developed over many years. And some of the original challenges were the fact that cartilage has a very poor capacity to regenerate, especially when the patient becomes slightly older. The knee joint, as I said, is exposed to heavy load, many, many times your body weight. And you really need to think about the problems with the bone integration, the surrounding cartilage, what happens with that, and maybe the most interesting one, what happens with the opposing cartilage. And we have now been doing this for 10 years. We are extremely proud of our history. We have achieved a lot, and we have come a long way. From the first surgery back in 2012 up to the completion yesterday of our big European study and a number of other European studies, which you will hear more about later today, we are now really looking forward. And I'm a shareholder myself. I think we really now can start look ahead and review the market opportunity that we have in the United States for this opportunity and what that would mean for us. And we're a tight team that's doing this, and many of us, including the board, have been here now for quite some time. The board of directors, it's an international board with a chairman from the United States with about 35 years in the industry. The management team is based here in Stockholm, and you will meet them all today. You will see that it's a pretty young team. They work very hard, they are passionate about what we're doing, and at the end of the day, they get the job done. And we know that we will have to add competences and individuals, and many of them probably better than us, especially in my case. And we don't even only have a good order inflow at Episurf these days. The inflow of CVs is impressive, and people do want to work with us because they know what we're doing is revolutionary, it's needed, and given the results, it's highly promising. On the clinical advisory side, again, a great deal of continuity, and also here you will meet some of those today. We have an excellent advisory board in Europe with not only knee surgeons but also radiologists. And on the US side of things, we have some of the best names we can imagine. The chief scientific advisor from Stryker, the founder of Biomet, being a big shareholder as well. So we're trying to set this up for success and a long-term strategy execution. And our vision is to restore people to fully living life. And we have goals of measuring our success, and we want to make sure that the Episealer becomes a standardized part of the treatment algorithm. And on our strategy, we've been talking about this many times. We'll focus on this part now for a few minutes. We understand this is of great interest to investors, and again, on the back of the results we just seen, it's really time to look more into the details here. A couple of years ago, we started what we call internally a controlled product launch in certain European countries. We have a direct sales force as opposed to using a distributor. A distributor might be more focused on a transaction from A to B. We are really establishing a new market segment. We have to be out there, be on the ground, in the actual operating theater, from the beginning, developing this together with our customers. We can only do that with our own people. The future looks a bit different, but in the early days, this was not an option. And our sales force has done a tremendous job. They have been out there trying to sell something that has no clinical evidence, no reimbursement, the regulatory work performed is limited, and a predecessor showed some quite bad results, so we also had that against us. But we've been fighting, and we have built a great market share with the early innovator segment in Europe, especially in Germany. And if you follow the theory, there is only a limited part of the market that you can access in these early days, and we have definitely done that. We have received a lot of scientific attention. People want to solve this problem with focal lesions in the middle-aged patients. We've seen that there's a willingness to pay for this procedure. And again, we have taken a leadership position. And we have now achieved about 800 surgeries in Europe. And as we also have seen that the technology works for a long time, our cumulative revision rate, depending on what kind of study you look at, it's between 0 and 4%. That's outstanding. And there is a strong patient demand. The patients are not satisfied with a can of painkillers and a message to wait for a knee replacement. That's not good enough. They want to get back to their life. They are looking for a treatment option. The surgeons are equally looking for a treatment option for this patient group. It's a difficult to treat patient group, and Episealer can definitely become that solution. And our addressable market, annually, there are about 2 million knee replacements in our initial markets in Europe and in the United States. This is a growing figure. The osteoarthritis is a growing problem in society. It grows with obesity, an aging population, etc. Younger patients are more often also being treated with knee replacement when there is only a hole in the cartilage and it's definitely not justified. And these knee replacements, they only last for 15 years maybe. So you need to redo them. You will hear more about this later today. And the scientific analysis leading up to a population suggests about 350,000 potential patients in the United States and in Europe per year. And we are not overstating this figure. We have done proper amount of haircuts. And these holes in the cartilage, they can look in many different ways. But they are out there, and this is, again, just a start on the way towards osteoarthritis, and these need to be treated. There are about 20,000 knee orthopedic surgeons in our target markets. And if you look at our target market, we're validating that by looking at the number of orthopedic surgeons, and it results in about 15 patients per annum. This is a niche indication. We will never sell the type of volumes that you do with knee replacement. But every surgeon sees these patients, and they might have 5, they might have 25 or 30 a year. 15 is a pretty good number illustrating this market. And that is also about 15% of the number of knee replacements in the markets. That's a difficult number. Some people do several hundred knee replacements and some do very few a year. But on average, that makes pretty much sense. And we have seen, as the surgeon becomes more comfortable with the surgical technique, they see the strong results, and they also benefit from an increased patient awareness as more patients are coming to their clinics asking for this kind of treatment. These numbers are highly realistic. We are well above them today in some instances. Let me show you. Our active users, that is in this definition actually all users that have used an Episealer in a single quarter. The annual run rate for them in each quarter has been growing. So it's been about 10 just pre the COVID-19 outbreak. And in that figure, there's a long list of surgeons who only do one just to try themselves, follow up on their patient. They might do 1 or 2 or 3 in lack of clinical data. So the figure is highly diluted. But look at the yellow line. That is the top 10 guys. And pre-COVID-19, they were trending at well above 20 and an increasing rate. So we know that this can happen. And the top 10 group, I think that's pretty well representative of a much bigger percentage of our customer group in the future. So annually, this is a market worth well over $1 billion per annum. That is arrived by using the figures I just mentioned and also applying a price level of between $2,500 and $3,000. The long-term market share target is 30% market share in all our prioritized markets. And breaking down these markets with a few more details. Of the total billion, about 40% of that relates to the European markets. Germany, other core markets such as the UK, Switzerland, Benelux, and of course the Nordics, and some other European Union markets. This is worth about $400 million. And about 60% is actually related to the world's biggest orthopedic market, the US market. And for the quick-minded individual, there are 3 million missing here. And that is a small piece which is called the early innovator market in Germany. That's our home market today. I understand the figures are low, but in this market, we have already captured a 25% market share, essentially without clinical evidence on an experimental basis. And next year, if the run rate continues, we will be well over 40. So we are moving to the right side of this slide, no question about it. And focusing a little bit more on 2020, we had an internal target to sell about 400 Episealers in 2020. That would be 100% up from 2019. This is about 1.1 per calendar day. And in the beginning of the year, we were definitely trending at above that. But as the corona effects became evident, this number obviously dropped as elective surgeries in Europe were more or less stopped. But if you look at the third quarter, we are now between 0.8 and 1 per calendar day. It's not a bad figure at all for us. We're back to where we want to be, and we want to take significant steps from here. But please remember, the COVID-19 effect doesn't change from one day to another. Our biggest customer, for example, is working on 25% of his consultation hours. So we have to respect the situation we have when looking at the short-term numbers. But make no mistake, we are on an upwards trend. So, summarizing this view then is post FDA approval, we will achieve a long-term market share of 30% in our target markets. And 3 years from a market launch in the United States, we will have achieved 15% in all our target markets. But before that, we will deliver substantial revenue growth on an annual basis up to FDA approval. We will expand the portfolio of clinical evidence in a significant way. We will achieve full market access in all our target markets. And in that expression, we include many of the regulatory hurdles that we need to get through, because these are many. And just because you have a CE certificate in Europe doesn't mean you have a carte blanche to sell everywhere to anyone. So there's a lot of work to do. We will also make sure that we have the best implant technology for focal lesions in this industry. And before I hand over to our CFO, Veronica Wallin, who is expecting another team member herself in a few weeks, we should, of course, get back to our UK patient. And we had a long discussion. I had many questions, but in the end, and in the interest of time, I will just focus on one final question I had for him. Thank you very much.
Do you think you will ever need a surgery again?
No. I've seen no sign whatsoever of needing any.
Thank you, Paul, and good afternoon. My name is Veronica Wallin, and I have been working as CFO at Episurf Medical since June 2017. During my presentation, I will go through some corporate considerations. As a start, this is our legal group. Our parent company, Episurf Medical, was founded 2008 by Leif Reed. We have our IP in a separate company and our operations mainly in another entity. Our largest addition to the group is Episurf Medical Inc. And there we work with FDA study, and our CEO, Katarina, will talk more about that later. We have also added India to the group, and there we're performing some strategic work. So moving on to the functional organization. We have 5 main departments, and we are working closely with various advisors. During the last years, all employees are included in stock option programs, and we have 41% women in the company and 50% in the management team. Our latest addition to the organization is reimbursement, which is a critical area for us. Let's continue with our funding history. At the end of the second quarter, we had a bit over 120 million in cash. Our latest funding was combined this spring, and we had a strong support both from our old shareholders and also our new. We have a stock market history since 2010, and we have been on the main market since June 2014. We have changed from Spotlight to First North, and then in the end, the main market. Following our latest fundraising, our shareholder list looks like this. We have made some clarifications from our list at Euroclear, and this is what we know as of today. Let's look at this for a moment. As you can see, we have a very small amount of A shares. It's only a small number. On the right side, you can see that we have highlighted some of our key shareholders. For example, Niles Novlit. He is the founder of the orthopedic market leader Biomet, and he became a shareholder in late 2018. Our CEO, Paul Reforce, is just below the top 10 with about 1.9 million shares, and our founder, Leif Ryd, owns about 800,000 shares. My final note here is just to clarify, shareholders on the top, on the right side, they became shareholders in our latest funding round, 2020. So let's go on and talk a little bit more about shareholder structure. And we have seen a quite substantial increase the last couple of years. And today we have approximately 7,000 shareholders. We saw a drop of shareholders in the beginning of COVID-19, but we have gained, and we have now many more. That's everything about the structure of the shareholders right now. And I just want to mention that our aim is to communicate frequently and also be very transparent with our shareholders. My final remark for today is how we have been affected by COVID-19. As Paul mentioned, we started the year very well. However, since Q1, COVID-19 has been evident for us because elective surgery in Europe has been either stopped or decreased. We have definitely seen an improvement in the latest weeks, as Paul also mentioned. The highest cost for us that has been affected during COVID-19 is marketing. For example, cost for congresses and exhibitions. And we can see that we, like many others, have to focus more on webcasted meetings. We had short-term layoffs in April to June, but we think that we do not need to use that anymore. We have also seen a very good cooperation in the company with high level of digitalization, and we think that this has made the company even stronger. And with that, I want to hand over to Katarina Flodström, our CEO. Thank you.
Good afternoon. At Episurf, we make a lot of press releases about patent approvals. And I would like to put that into context and give you an overview of our intellectual property coverage. So I was involved in writing the very first patent application in 2008. And today we have more than 180 patent applications globally. These belong to approximately 30 patent families, and that corresponds to then around 30 innovations. The patent work is constantly ongoing. So in the graph below, you can see that we started working in the early days on this to protect the devices and what they looked like at that stage. And then as we have continued the development of our devices and our imaging technology, we have filed additional patents constantly. So you can see that both new applications and the approvals are constantly growing in this graph. And we work together with our external counsel, Rouse, previously called IPQ, in a very intense collaboration. On the left, you see a map with a global spreading of our patents. And the colors reflect how many patents we have in each country. Europe is, of course, a main focus area for us, but you can also see the dark blue color for the US. The US is where the competition is toughest, and we need to make sure we position ourselves well there for the future. Here are some details of what we cover with our patents. On the left, you see the result from a keyword search of our patent portfolio. Of course, medical technology is the largest segment, but with this, I would like to show you that we also have these yellow segments with computer technology and control that correspond to design process, the individualized design, our medical solutions, segmentation, artificial intelligence, and so on, is a big part of this diagram. On the right, you see some specific examples. For example, we have our implants with specific features that we have protected, and of course, our instruments that are crucial to make sure you get the implant in exactly the right position. So we have a set of surgical instruments that we have developed that have very delicate features, and we have made sure that we have protected those. We also have the segmentation, which is when you have your medical images, and out of those you can make a 3D model showing, for example, cartilage and bone. And for that we have computerized technologies that we have also protected. To conclude, I would like to say that intellectual property is a very complex field, of course, but we have invested a lot in this since the start of the company. And in relation to the size of our company, we feel that we are very well positioned. Another field where you need to have a global strategy is within regulatory affairs. And this table shows you the regulatory approvals we have in place for our devices. So it's a focus on the European market where we have the CE approval that opens up the European market. And we have the CE approval in place for all our implant devices and also for our associated surgical instruments, as well as for epioscopy, which is our visualization tool for the knee joint. So Europe has been the first priority, but we are also working towards the US market and aiming for the so-called FDA approvals. So we have the IDE study, which is ongoing to finally one day make sure we have our knee implants on the US market. And I will talk more about that this afternoon. But now I will stay in Europe for a while. In Europe, there are big regulatory changes going on. So there is a new regulation called the MDR, Medical Device Regulation, that entered into force in 2017. And we are now in a transition period. And in May 2021, we need to comply with this regulation. It is replacing the old directive MDD. The MDR puts a lot of higher requirements on us as a manufacturer. So there are higher demands now for what we need to do to put a device on the market. For example, there are higher demands on the clinical data needed. There are also higher demands on what we need to do after we have put the devices on the market. So this so-called post-market surveillance is becoming more important for us to really follow up the patients and the devices thoroughly. And with the MDR, we have to make changes in our processes and how we work, and we had to make sure we comply in May next year. However, for the devices that we have already put on the market, we have certificates, CE certificates, that are valid for some more time. So they are issued under the MDD, and there is a grace period. So devices that have a valid MDD certificate can be valid as long as until May 2024. So let's see here how we are doing. We have the Episurf knee implants, and we have our certificates in place, so we can continue and sell these until 2024 under the MDD. And it's the same for the ankle implant, Episurf Talus, and also for our visualization tool, Epioscopy. So MDR is a big focus for us and something we really need to work with and make sure we are prepared for. However, there is no rush for us to have new product certificates in place. And we are very grateful for that, because this is something that is putting a lot of pressure on medical device companies these days. With that, I would like to say thank you. And I will present the next speaker. It will be Professor Peter Remans from the Netherlands. He's a very experienced epithelial surgeon. And before that, we will have a short break with a patient video. Thank you.
Jag sprang jättemycket. Jag var ute, det var 7-8 mil i veckan, så jag sprang Göteborgsvarv och Lidingölopp och sådana saker. Så när jag inte kunde göra det enkla på att ta på sig padojor och sticka ut och springa, då tyckte jag att det påverkar ju min livskvalitet. Som idrottslärare är man ju ofta ganska aktiv. Som lök på laxen så började jag få mer ont i knät då. Så att det var ju en jobbig situation även på jobbet.
De patienterna är ju desperata, för de har liksom ingen hjälp att få. De har försökt med andra metoder och önskar ha ett vanligt liv. De önskar kunna gå och ta hand om sina barn, träna, cykla, och man har ont vid varje steg man tar. Det blir ett väldigt begränsat liv.
Ja, 2 gånger gick de in och rensade, och 2 gånger gjorde de såna här så kallade mikrofraktureringar. Och vad jag kommer ihåg så kändes det som det varit bättre efter det. Men sen har det liksom sakta tillbaks till ruta 1, kan man väl säga ungefär.
Sitta framför en person och säga nu är det första personen i världen. Vi har väldigt mycket liksom forskning bakom oss och jag känner mig ganska trygg. Men vi vet inte riktigt hur det kommer att gå med människan. Så det var en väldigt speciell kontakt, men han var väldigt positiv och rak, och han kände att jag är väldigt idrottsintresserad, jag är en väldigt aktiv person. Som det är nu, de har gjort allt med mig. Jag klarar inte av det här. Jag vill ju åka skidor, det här är för mig inget liv.
Alltså alla operationer är ett ingrepp. Men jag tänkte, jag kör på det här. Men jag vill vara aktiv ett tag till, så att säga. Om jag inte hade fått implantatet så hade jag sakta men säkert blivit sämre. Jag tror att smärtan försvann ganska snabbt efter jag kom hem. Det betyder mycket för mig att jag kan göra saker med min familj. Alltså vi älskar att åka skidor, alla ledder och utför upp för allt vad det är. Vi turar med stighudar, och jag går med mina barn med respektive, de är runt 30, och alltså, pappan kan hänga med utan att det är något större problem. Visst blir jag trött, men jag har inte ont. Så det är saker som betyder jättemycket för mig.
Det man kan se är ju att han liksom, både vad gäller styrka och funktion, är i stort sett liksidig och nästan bättre i det vänstra då än i det högra, i det med plantatet kontra det andra. Om man jämför med många av dem vi träffar som har en knäprotes, så är de inte i samma utsträckning lika aktiva som Göran är.
För nu har det gått 5 år och han tränar ju för Vasaloppet. Det är 90 kilometer lång skidåkningstävling.
Jag ska åka Vasaloppet öppet spår då, i februari, i slutet av februari blir det. Så att det är första gången som jag åker det efter att jag har opererat mig.
So I think everybody hopefully heard who I am. I'm Pieter Eemans, orthopedic surgeon in Maastricht. And this first slide was to illustrate that I think that motion capture, but also imaging gives a big step forward in the field of orthopedics. And I think we also have to look not only to the Episurf, the implant, but also the damage report. I'll skip this one. I talked sufficient about this one, about my conflict of interest. And I hope you see this slide now. Is it running okay? Yeah, I see it next to me. So these are the Dutch numbers for the expected increase of osteoarthritis compared to other diseases. And what you see is the steep increase of especially osteoarthritis, probably due to overweight, sports injuries, and increasing age. And what you see then is that we thought that the total hip and total knee would help sufficiently against osteoarthritis, but we now are encountering a treatment gap. And the treatment gap is due to the fact that cartilage has unique properties. And when giving a lecture to my students, I illustrated by these 2 pictures. On the left side, you see 8 elephants standing on a refrigerator. And these are the pressures when performing sports, for instance. It can increase until 10 times your body weight. So it will be 900 to 1,000 kilograms for me personally. And the unique feature of cartilage is that the friction of healthy cartilage is even less than ice skating, which is popular in the Netherlands. And we have to go to Sweden or Norway because it's not freezing here anymore. But these are the unique features of cartilage, of healthy cartilage. And we want to maintain that, of course, throughout life. But it becomes more and more difficult due to the other reasons, which I just mentioned. So to compare cartilage and also the joint, I think the comparison with a bicycle tire is quite striking. That's also a lot of people cycle in the Netherlands and also in Sweden. But looking at the structure of a bicycle tire, you see the tubings, the rim, and the spokes. And actually, if you look at cartilage with the underlying bone and the tubercular bone, you see the same mechanical features, I would say. And that's quite difficult to mimic when we want to recapitulate that when this structure is diseased. But I also think it's important to remember if we only have a flat tubing, so only a cartilage defect, or if the subchondral bone is also affected, which is often the case in the middle-aged patients. So we want to recapitulate this unique feature, which is quite difficult to my meaning. And what happens when we are born is that we are all born as a cartilage skeleton. The top surface remains cartilage. However, during the process of osteoarthritis, around the rim, the problem often happens. So the pressure gets too high when the tire is flat, and this is a living rim. So the rim will also suffer. It will increase in thickness. The spokes will break, and then you have to see that you have to replace the whole thing. So not only the tubing, but also part of the rim and maybe also part of the subchondral bone, so the tubercular bone. So the difficulty in cartilage repair is when is only the tire broken and when is there a problem with the subchondral bone, and do we have to replace that? If we then look at cartilage repair, in the past we thought that the regenerative therapies, they could heal the cartilage defect, and often that's true in the case of the young patients. But also if you look at the different tissues, then you see on the left side, you see a brain tissue, cartilage and heart tissue. And we know, especially for the brain and the heart, this does not regenerate. In the middle, next to the liver, which is the famous Greek saga of Prometheus, the liver will regenerate, but also the bone has a good healing capacity, also in the older age. And I think that's the difference, how we want to convert the restorage of the function of the joint and of the cartilage and the remaining cartilage. Are we going to try to regenerate the difficult tissue in the older patients, or are we going to convert to a tissue which is easier to regenerate and heal the bone? So if we look at the history of cartilage repair, in green there are the regenerative methods. So in general, the oldest way to try to regenerate cartilage is microfracture. We penetrate small holes in subchondral bone, hoping to reach stem cells which heal the cartilage defect. However, if the subchondral bone is also affected, then I think we break the rim, which was already bad, trying to heal the cartilage. So we might be in a situation that we increase the problem by breaking this rim. So it works for small defects in young patients, but I have my doubts in the older and middle-aged patients. Then we try to stimulate this cartilage by adding scaffolds composed of collagen or hyaluronic acids or gels. Even we try to stimulate it further with cells. And we also see it has an improved effect if you add cells. However, I think it's not the whole group of patients receiving cartilage repair which are capable to regenerate. If we then convert to the bone, which is in orange, then we see the autografts. So that's more the mosaicplasty. You convert then a small implant from an unloaded part to a more loaded part, and it works, but you can only handle small defects because then you make more damage to other parts of the joints if you want to heal a bigger cartilage defect. The allografts are of course popular, but concerning disease transfer, logistics, etc., it's less available in Europe than in the US. And there are implants which regenerate, but all of them have limited proof, I would say. And of course, at the end, the metal implant. So if we go any further with the current problem of osteoarthritis, we see that the top is okay. So if you receive your first arthroplasty, let's say at the age of 60, 65, then you get one revision, maybe a second one. But at the end, if you do that at a younger age, then you might go into your second or third revision. So there is place for the middle-aged patient for joint saving procedures, and more of joint saving procedures are coming to the market to handle this problem. So what's important to remember, I think, for cartilage repair is the tubing only broken, or also the rim, and should we help only the cartilage, or should we also replace part of the underlying bone? And again, the difficulty with cartilage, it is a unique arcade-like structure capable of drawing in a lot of water, therefore having a low friction and having its unique features. On the right side of this slide, you see the increasing imaging technologies, which show us not only that there is cartilage present, but also the quality of the cartilage, and also the quality in the lower right image of the healed cartilage, which was done now by microfracture. And you see that it doesn't have the different zones and the mechanical features of this repair cartilage. So it will work for small defects, it will work in the younger patient, but it often doesn't work if the rim and the underlying trabecular bone is affected. So what we see more and more is the difference, how can we regenerate and what group can we regenerate? And more we see that the middle-aged group, we aim to resurface, so not regenerate, but resurface the cartilage defect. However, within the minds of most of the orthopedic surgeons, we think it's still easy and cheap to do microfracture, and you see that microfracture or chondroplasty is often conducted by many surgeons. However, you also see that the cause of a cartilage defect, degeneration on the right side, is still one of the main causes of a cartilage defect. So are we looking at a cartilage defect in which only the tubing is broken, or are a lot of cartilage defects also have an affected rim, so the subchondral bone? And why do we do that? As orthopedic surgeons, we are often focused on the lesion, and most algorithms are based on lesion size. But more and more we see in literature that there's something like joint homeostasis. So how old is your defect? How old is your patient? What are the biomechanics, like the alignment of your joint? Is it a fresh defect? Is it contained? Or is it an old defect and doesn't have any containment? So it's so large that it goes aside of the of the joint surface. BMI is of course important. So there are many things in the back of the minds of the orthopedic surgeon when deciding which treatment for which patient. And often we also don't know many things because that's our field of work, that's life, and we discover still more factors. But what we know is that we often look at the lesion size, but I think we also have to look at other factors, because we know that the largest group in the US undergoing cartilage repair is the middle age group. However, if we ask our peers if there's an age limit to do regeneration or microfracture, many of them say, well, that's the only thing we have, and that's what's the best available now, so there's probably no age limit. So there's something to do there if we look at the literature. There are many lesions in the field. You see 60% of the arthroscopic procedures see a lesion. However, there are also lesions which are not vulnerable for the future. So we should really know which lesions go into further deteriorations and which don't. But often in the middle-aged, I think they will go to further deterioration and osteoarthritis. We recently submitted the review to American Journal of Sports Medicine, and there we saw that microfracture in the middle-aged doesn't work. The cell therapies have some working mechanism. However, if we look at resurfacing, so small implants or allograft, they seem to work the best in the middle-aged people. This is also a publication which is now accepted for the journal Cartilage. In the past, we performed the perichondriumplasty, so that's converting a membrane of your ribs to your cartilage defect. It was done in the 80s, but most of the patients we kept in the Netherlands, they were quite homebound, so we have a quite good follow-up of a group of 80 patients. And then 25 years after cartilage repair, we looked at a conversion to total knee surgery. And what was important of these patients when converting to knee surgery in the 25 years after follow-up of this surgery. So we see previous surgery. So if somebody had a microfracture which failed or a cartilage repair attempt which failed, then often regeneration with this method didn't succeed. Also, time of symptoms. So if the time of symptoms, the patient had more than 2 years of symptoms, we saw that the regeneration with this technique did not work. So this illustrates that we have to look at the middle-aged patients, but even more, we have to look also at the joint homeostasis, which means that there can be even younger patients than 40 years of age, which has several treatments or had a long time of symptoms, which may not work on regenerative treatments. I think this is one of the interesting slides also with the product of the implant itself. This is the damage report provided to the orthopedic surgeon, and it gives a holistic view, same as the picture images gave it with the motion analysis in the beginning. And as orthopedic surgeons, we see more and more the different structures being affected or not, and making us the decision if we should resurface this cartilage defect or not. And also, I think it prevents salvage cases in which we try to treat more diffuse osteoarthritis by the Episurf. So I think this really is the stepwise introduction of a product, and it supports it a lot and helped me a lot of decision making when to try to resurface the cartilage defect and when it's not possible anymore. Within the field of osteoarthritis, this is the last chronic disease where we cannot measure too many things during the course of osteoarthritis. So in contrast to cardiovascular diseases where you can measure high blood pressure, and if you know that you lower your blood pressure, your problems in the future will be less. We didn't have that tool yet, but I think with the conversion to higher field MRI forces, we can still see more details and get also a better view which cartilage defects we can still resurface or even regenerate, or which cartilage defects should not be treated. So in general, concerning imaging, what's on the current market now, and I think especially for the Episurf, which makes it unique, are these patient-specific implants, making sure that myself and my colleagues implant this product properly, so it really conducts the forces well on the underlying and adjacent cartilage. What you also see is that you can evaluate therapies better. You can also do your decision making better, which is a part of the damage report. And also the damage report, the third and last one, is that maybe we have to convert in some patients with only mild symptoms to early detection and even preventive measures. And what you see below here is also a small implant. You see a meniscal implant, which is also relying more and more on imaging and patient-specific production. So to predict the future a little bit, I think we on the left side, you still have symptom release, explanation, weight loss, etc. There's still place for some patients to regenerate, although I think the field, as predicted in the past, is not that big, because if you look at the cover of Time magazine, the #1 jobs in 2010 would be tissue engineer, but I don't see them yet. So there's place for regeneration, but not as predicted in the past. And what we see now, I think, is with the better imaging, with the patient-specific possibilities to make small spare parts, I think there is a growing market of patient-specific implants, which is the Episealer, of course. And then at their proper age, there will be a place for joint replacement in some patients. Hopefully, we can bring that number down by having the proper preventive measures and small implants. So what you see on this image is on your left lower side, there are the risk profiles of cardiovascular disease. I also hope we get them more open for osteoarthritis. Then we can explain people and warn them. However, for a group of people, being traumatic or maybe the cartilage defect is the first symptom of beginning osteoarthritis, we have to decide between repair and replace. And I think on the right lower side, there are some upcoming technologies. So injection therapies for the more diffuse osteoarthritis, the group, the younger patients, especially with the traumatic cartilage repair, where only the tubing is damaged, we can regenerate the cartilage. Of course, in all patients, we have to work on weight loss, osteotomy, and advice. And I think with the upcoming imaging protocols and 3D printing and patient-specific implants, we have finally spare parts before we have to replace the whole motor with the total knee. So this, hopefully, will be the future perspective. And then we convert to this one. You also see that the International Cartilage Repair Society has now joint preservation in its name, in its title. And hopefully we can shift that we we implant our first total knee arthroplasty at the age of 60, 65, and we have a tool set to preserve the joint. So in summary, cartilage defects are a problem, especially also in a middle-aged patient or joint. Joint preservation is important. It gets increasingly attention to stop or slow down the process of osteoarthritis. It is nice if we can even reverse it, but I think that's for the future. Joint preservation will maintain locomotion. We see more and more that locomotion is important for cardiovascular diseases, for cancer, and even for dementia. And hopefully we have a healthy life. We know that in the Netherlands, there's more and more attention also about the social and economic burden of osteoarthritis for the future. And finally, the Episealer can play a very important role, especially also together with the damage report or the Episcope, that we get help as orthopedic surgeons in our algorithms and decision making. So we try to prevent this. This was done in the past when we did regenerative therapies, and the MRI techniques were not that good, and we had to take biopsies 1 year later. Hopefully we can follow the cartilage better with these small implants and see that we can preserve this unique feature, which was illustrated in my first slide. So please love your cartilage, and it's open for questions now.
Okay, Professor Emens, I'm the one asking you the questions now. So my name is Anders Hedlund. I am a life science analyst at Redeye, covering, among other companies, Episurf Medical. and I'm happy to be part of this Capital Markets Day. Peter, in your capacity as a clinician, can you just go ahead and describe this middle-aged patient gap patient? What is it that you have in front of you, and how many such patients do you see on a regular basis?
Yeah, the problem is we see them more and more. So what you see in the last years, decades, is that the average age in which we implant the total knee is decreasing. So I think when I started my residency, I think the average age might be 60. And now the average age, I think, is between 50, 55. So that's becoming more a problem. We also see that we thought, at least the people who trained me, they thought that removing part of the meniscus was no problem. But we see that we try to conserve the meniscus more and more. So we encounter a group of patients asking for total knee replacement, and we don't have any other thing in our toolbox, or not many things. And I think we have to be more aggressive, especially when encountering a cartilage defect in this age group, due to the effect of the pothole effect, and also due to the fact that we see if we don't treat it properly in the beginning. So if we do a first surgery, which was not the proper one to repair this cartilage effect, we might push them into osteoarthritis, early osteoarthritis. So proper decision making, having more tools would be convenient, at least.
Yeah. And can you quantify anything about in your capacity as a clinician? How many patients do you actually see in this patient gap?
Per year, annually, you mean?
Yeah, can use whatever figure.
Yeah, so I think it's so the patients suitable for cartilage repair in the middle-aged. I think there are quite some, and I would also say that the middle-aged is a gap which is not capturing everything. What you see more is also people who had a cartilage repair surgery and then coming back after 10 years. So I think, but I'm a little bit conflicted in this one, because I'm an expert center. Many people are sent from different parts of the Netherlands to Maastricht because the interest. So, but in general, I think the figures mentioned by Paul are quite correct. So I think that 1 in 4 or 5 patients, you like to have something else than a total knee arthroplasty.
Yeah. And okay, so can you say anything about how you treat those patients today, and the percentage between, and since you are an Episealer user, an early innovator, how many percentage do you use Episealer on?
Well, for the cartilage repair, I think it's getting 1/3, maybe 50-50 already. That's also partially due to the fact that there's quite a group of older patients in the south of the Netherlands, and also being referred to parts of Belgium. So I think it's increasing also due to demographics. So I would say it's quite unique. There are other parts doing more sports medicine, and they capture the younger patients. I think the real market lies in the fact that you have the low volume surgeons, and they often encounter this group of patients, because the younger patient, they often try to find a sports medicine person. They search for the internet. The older patient encountering a cartilage defect often are treated by low volume surgeons. This also was clear of the numbers in the US. So you see that there is a higher number of surgeons treating 1 or 2 patients, but altogether they have about 50 or 60% of the cartilage repair surgeries.
Right.
And that's also something you see in literature. Most of the papers out there are being produced by high volume surgeons, often related to a sports medicine group. And often the middle-aged persons, they are not reflected well in literature, only if you look at those bigger surveys which I presented.
Right. so we are running up. Can you just give a rather short answer? What was the tipping point for you to decide when you decided to use Episealer in the clinic, and what does it take for your colleagues to follow?
So there, I will try to be short.
Yeah.
So for me, it was that I saw patients coming back after 5 to 10 years, sometimes 15 years, still at the middle age after regenerative therapies, and I couldn't offer them a proper treatment because I knew that the second aim to regenerate was quite often doomed to fail. And the other one is that the preceding implants, if you look at the mechanics, then you see that you have to implant it quite smooth with the other cartilage, and also that the implant has to be more or less patient specific. And then you cope with the different mechanics between the cobalt chrome and the cartilage, which is been done by Episurf.
Right. Okay, Professor Emans, thank you for joining today. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I'm Fredrik Zetterberg, Marketing Director of the company. An improbable idea that might work. This is an abstract, one of the very first preclinical studies. It was presented at the Swedish Orthopedic Society annual meeting in 2011. A lot has happened since then, and I would like to give you an update on the progress and what we have ahead of us. Before I start, I would like to clarify some terms and definitions that I will talk about today. COES is a frequently used PROM, patient-reported outcome measures. COES is commonly used for evaluation of the clinical outcome of the knee procedure. Revision today has nothing to do with accounting. It's about the procedure done in order to compensate for a failed implant. When I'm out presenting our technology to potentially new user, I sometimes get the comment that we have new evidence. That is wrong. We have a very comprehensive preclinical material. That is not always the case within the medtech industry. We also have clinical evidence. We have the first manuscript, which was published with the follow-up of 10 very first patients to receive an Episurf implant in Sweden. It was published in 2018, and the manuscript concludes that it's safe and that the technology also provides significant improved knee function as well as pain relief. It also finds that there are no implant loosening. That's highly important when we talk about orthopedic implants. Second publication is a case report. It's with a 31-year-old Danish carpenter, and I would like to tell you a little about his history. 31-year-old, in the middle of his life, he was told by several surgeons that there were no more treatment alternatives available for him. He would have to give up his career as a carpenter. And what's worse, he wouldn't be able to play with his son anymore. 3 months after the surgery, he was able to go back full-time as a carpenter. He later on also were able to play soccer and handball. He was also able to play ball with his son again. One could argue that this is anecdotal. It is. But is it less relevant? Anyone who has a child would understand the difference that Episurf made to him. This is about the history. Now about the pipeline. We have 2 clusters of users who decided to pool their clinical results and submit it for publication. The first study I will talk about is a 2-year follow-up of 30 Swedish patients. It's led by Dr. Anders Stålman at Capio Artroclinic. At 2-year follow-up, the results show significant improved knee function as well as pain relief. It also shows very low revision rate, and I will talk a little bit more about revision rate later. It has been submitted for publication. We expect it to be published within the coming months. Second study, it's a continuation of the very first study with the first 10 patients. It's now 5 to 7 year follow-up. There are still no revision, and when I talked to Anders last week, he told me about amazing results, and we sent out a press release about it. The positive results at the 24-month follow-up still remain at 75 months. We're now talking about sustainable results. So manuscript in progress, and he promised that it will be submitted before the end of this year. The third study I'm today very proud to talk about. It's a European multi-center study that reports on the outcome of 80 patients who received an Episurf implant. It shows significant knee improvement, pain relief, and very low revision rate, also this one. It was yesterday accepted for publication. I wish we had the time to go through the author list from that study here today. I recommend you to Google the names on this list. Previous speaker, Professor Emans, is one of them. Next speaker, Dr. Johannes Holst, the principal investigator of the study, is the next speaker after me. Anyone in our industry would be very proud of having all these names in a manuscript with their products. They are all our customers. They have performed this study not because we pay them, but because they are proud of the results and they want to make the Episurf available in the treatment algorithm everywhere. Looking at the results, this is COAS. COAS goes from 0 to 100, where 0 is the worst and 100 is the best result. The dark green bar shows the preoperative result, and the light green is after 2 years of the surgery. It's a minimum of 8 points improvement is required to say that the improvement is clinically relevant. In each subdomain, we show at least 3 times the minimal required improvement, and it's all significant. We now know that the Episurf works, but how is it different compared to other treatment alternatives? This is about revisions, here converted into survival rate. Looking at the green bar on top, green line on top, that's the Episurf. If we look at the dotted blue line, that represents one of the more complex treatment alternatives, autologous chondrocyte implant. It's a procedure, when it works, provides very good result for the patient. Unfortunately, in middle-aged patients and older, the revision rate is relatively high. The same is the situation with microfracture. Nor does the first generation medium metal implant show as good results as the Episurf. For the first generation medium metal implant, the revision rate were at 18% at 2-year follow-up. At 5-year follow-up, the revision rate were 27%. We are, in the publication that was approved for publication yesterday, at 2.5% at 2 year. Looking at rehabilitation and recovery, this makes sense not only for the patient, but also from health economic perspective for the entire society. Our patients, as the Danish carpenter I told you about, they are back working after 3 months. They are walking, they can ride a bicycle, when their friends who had biological treatment alternatives are still on crutches. You can imagine if you're sitting on an insurance company and should decide on which treatment alternative you should support and reimburse. What do we have in pipeline? More. We have a survivorship analysis that we just submitted, where we report on the number of revisions versus total number of Episurf procedures. Where we also report on the reason and outcome of all to us known revisions. We have a comparative study performed at Charité University Hospital in Berlin. They compared the knee result of Episurf patients with the knee function of patients who received a total knee replacement as well as healthy non-treated knees. The information we have from the study group is that they are very impressed of the knee function of our patients. We restore the joint. A cost utility study. We have, together with the Linköping University, prepared for a cost utility study. The model is ready, and once the results from the ongoing studies are published, we can plug in the data from those studies into our model, and it's ready for submission. This publication will be very important for us when we apply for reimbursement in new as well as existing markets. The EPIC knee. It's a comparative randomized trial, Episurf versus microfracture. It's one of our most prioritized initiatives right now, and my colleague Katarina will tell you more about that one. Will our clinical evidence have an impact on the sales results? Yes, it will have a significant impact. We have unique evidence that our technology works, that it provides improved knee function, pain relief, and it's sustainable results. We have the evidence enough to approach any new user, any healthcare provider or insurance company. We have no reason to be hesitant, modest, or defensive. We can allow ourselves to be far more aggressive in our marketing. We will make sure that any potential new user know how Episurf can help them to improve the life for their patients, as it did for all of those patients who shared their story with us. May I introduce the next speaker, the principal investigator, our European multicenter study, Dr. Johannes Holst, Parkklinik Mannhagen Ortho Center, Hamburg. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Fredrik, for the introduction. Very nice of you. So I'm glad to join you in this market meeting this afternoon, and it will be a pleasure for me to present our data on patient-specific mini implants and point out why I think and we think that will be the future in cartilage repair. So let's see on my agenda. I will do a small introduction of small implants, hypotheses, material and methods of our CPL study, and then we'll point out the results and finally lead to the discussion. The introduction, the treatment of focal cartilage lesions, grade 4 lesions with biological repair procedures is considered to be successful in young patients, less than 35 years of age. And partial or total knee arthroplasty is accepted in patients which are hopefully elderly patients over 65 years and older. And it's evident that there is a remaining gap group of mid-agers with high demands, and everybody you have seen this afternoon is one of those. So there was the first idea of small implants was introduced by Hemicap resurfacing in 2003. It was a screw fixation navigation surface reaming matching inlay implant, but it was a conventional implant. It was not specifically made for the patient. And so the results of those metal small implants, and here you see the annual report, the actual annual report of the Australian Orthopedic Association, the joint resistor, has over a period of 11 years a revision rate for those small implants of 45.6%. And this is a high percentage of revisions. And even after 2 years, already 16.7% of those arthroplasties, so small implants, were revised. Most of those primary partial resurfacing replacements are revised to either knee replacement, which is amazing because it's 62%. Even so, only one part of the knee, medial or lateral or patellofemoral, is affected by the osteoarthritis, or even a unicompartmental knee replacement, which makes more sense, in 21.1%. And the Danish register has a survival rate after 6 years of 45%. Here, 230 of those hemicaps. And if you look on single surgeons outcome, you see a 23 conversion to total knee at 7 years, and you see a 47 conversion at 7 years, or a survival rate of 40% after 9 years in Larson's Danish investigation. Here you see the follow-up and the review of literatures. There are 10 out of 21 studies with 334 patients. You see they are all mid-age, 43 years old, and you have a complication rate overall of 26.1%. And if I look on my own results, and I started in 2006 with my first uni on hemicaps, overlooking 24 of those patients, and we had 10 revisions in 6 patients, coming up with 42% of complication rate, and we revised 21% of those patients to different procedures. But what is amazing, we have on the one side of those conventional small implants, we have a very high revision rate, either in the registers or even in single surgeons. But on the other side, we have really good functional outcome of those small implants. And so we could quote, if it works, it will work. You see this patient, 2009, it's all weight-bearing x-rays, and you don't see a weight-bearing x-rays, and we always count for the joint space, and the joint space represents the cartilage height, and the cartilage height is what we are aiming for to preserve this. And we are preserving his lateral knee without a small implant for this period of almost 10 years. So what could be the reasons for those failures or for those poor outcomes in respect of revision or survival rate? There could be a poor congruency with the surrounding native cartilage, because we have a company curvature. It's not individualized. The implant could be therefore too proud because it's not imitating the native cartilage. And we could not maybe listen to the aspect of an insufficient remaining meniscus function, what we did now when we put in the Episurf. And overall, we have to focus, is the implant individual enough, or should it be more individual? And this was the point when I got interested and excited about the individual patient-specific implant. And we have even more positive aspects when we are dealing with Episurf, because we start with a damage report. And this damage report is unique. What we do is we have a 3D mapping of the MRI, and we are identifying the defects, the depth of the defects, the size of the defects. And for that, we are already having a very clear impression of what is going on in this joint. And we, by using the MRI, we are able to look on the different compartments of the knee, which should be intact, obviously, because we are dealing with a mono device. And then in the second step, we have patient-specific instruments, which will ensure that we are accomplishing the implantation as we are wishing it from our planning. So through this 3D mapping and through this three-dimensional model, we are achieving, and we are seeing and identifying the defect, sizing it, and sizing the implant, and having the patient-specific instruments, the EpiGuide and the EpiReamer and the EpiDummy, to put in the final patient-specific from MR data created implant. So having all this, I think the reasons why we are getting so successful with Episurf is because we are achieving a perfect congruency of the native cartilage. We are basically copying it. And if you see from planning on the left side to final implantation, we are achieving what we would like to plan and what we like to achieve. So the reasons, number 2 is, do we achieve a proper implantation? Yes, we do, because we have the chance by using the EpiGuide to stepwise deepening by 0.2 millimeters. So what we're achieving is a so-called safe zone. We estimate that native cartilage probably is 4 to 5 millimeter flexible on pressure. So you have to put in the implant a little bit deeper, and the so-called estimate of a safe zone is 0.4 to 0.6 millimeters. And by deepening it through the EpiGuide by 0.2 millimeters, we are achieving this goal in a perfect way. So how we start? We start with identifying the defect, and here you see the positioning of the defect on the medial condyle, and the dark red area is grade 4, and the lighter red area is grade 3. And now in co-work with the engineers in Stockholm, we are able to plan the ideal positioning that is covering all of the defect of those cartilage lesions. And then finally, after having detected the defect, we are already presented the EpiGuide, and the EpiGuide shows now the landmark of the defect. And this is exactly what we're then aiming for during the surgery, to imitate or to have the same landscape of the defect looking through the EpiGuide when we do the surgery. And you can see here from the different positions how we can approach the surgery. And within the surgery, then we have the EpiGuide, and you see that the landmarking of the defect right here is identical to the landmarking looking through the animation. And finally, we do the deepening up to that point where we finally put in the implant. And in this patient, one of our first patients, ATA 1 and 2, we did a patellofemoral resurfacing, and we did a inlay prosthesis, a small implant, an Episealer on the medial. And this patient had a couple of prior surgeries. How do we deal with our patients? Is the patients affected by what we are doing? It's a little bit. We do this to small incisions where we have a soft tissue window we are working with. So our aim is not to disconnect any muscle, so work through the capsula of the knee and prevent any kind of muscle injury. We call those surgical techniques MIS, minimal invasive surgery. And for that, the patient is then 2 weeks touch weight bearing, 2 weeks of progressive increase. So we have accomplished full weight bearing after 4 weeks. We allow patients obviously to have free range of motions. We don't do active squat training for 6 weeks over 40 degrees. And then we do CPM, continuous passive motion, immediately. In the multi-center study, and I'm very proud that we can present it today, because it was yesterday finally accepted after all this work what was done at KSST, which is one of the leading journals throughout Europe and the world. It's credited by the best of the 30% best journals in the world. So we couldn't be really proud that we got accepted. And the group of surgeons is on the right side, and all we dedicated our patients from 9 sites throughout Europe. And we focused on patients with those focal defects, grade 4 and 3, where no biological repair was indicated anymore. We focused on single lesions of the femoral condyle with intact cartilage, obviously on the tibia. We had big discussions how intact and how preserved the meniscus should be. And obviously we looked at knees which had a normal leg axis within 3 degrees of variation, varus or valgus. We followed up those patients in preoperatively at 3, 6, 12, and 24 months. We did demographics and surgical data, and we had outcome scores, which are presenting basically scores which are accepted throughout the orthopedic community. That is the TAGNA, the COS, and the VAS. The demographics, and once more, you see we had a quite good group of 40 male and 46 female patients. The age was an average 49, and you see it's a wide range of 27 to 69 years of age. Body mass index pretty normal for Northern Europe. Most of the patients, we performed the Episealer on the medial condyle 68, lateral condyle 7, and the trochlea 11. We used, because we did that in the very beginning, we used more Episealer Solo than Episealer Twin. The Solo is the round implant, and the Twin is the oval implant. In our impression, we have with the Twin the even better implant nowadays to cover most of the defects which are presented in the knee oval. You see that we have a quite big group of patients which had prior procedures, biological repair procedures like microfracture, mosaicplasty, HTO, it's alignment surgery. But of those patients, even 30% had persisting pain. And looking at the follow-up, and this is always in creating evidence, academical evidence, we are up to 95%, which is a very good success for the group. The results and the revision, and I would love to point this out. We had only 2 revisions. We revised 2.5% of those patients within the first 2 years. And I pointed out to you the data of the Australian register where the conventional small implant was already revised at 17% at 2 years. And actually the infection is not even related, and persisting pain must not be related either to the, to the implant. Adverse events, as I said, 1 infection. We did 1 arthroscopy most of the times, and it's a common problem after open knee surgery that you have to debridement of scar tissue. We had 1 mechanical clicking, but was not related to the implant. We had 1 thrombosis, and we had, and this is very important too, we had no technical or instrument-related failure in our group. And even if we have revisions, this technology of AP guides could help us, even in the case of revision, to preserve as much bone stock as you can. So this is the possibility of using the data, the primary data from the first surgery in case of revision. So you don't need to sacrifice a lot of bone, and you have the opportunity as a second line of defense to do whatever you need to do in a second surgery in case of revision. Coming to the results, we have the results in the mean course average by of these 86 patients, and we collected the data. And what is really impressive is that we are having a reduction of pain and symptoms over the period of 2 years, and we have an increase of the performance in activities of daily life, in sports, and obviously for the quality of life. Patients here are, that's the investigation of our survey. And if you look now on the results obtained again, you see that we are getting more and more up to 80 out of 100. And I think this is what we achieving in those patients, and we can be very, very satisfied with those results. And so this is maybe the point to say that I think, and first of all, us as users of this implant of the Episealer, we are very satisfied, and we can be proud, as well as Episurf Medical, that our data of this multi-center study, which are presented now and which are now released on KSST, document that, and they are a milestone for us all, that they document that this is a very safe implant and safe operation for the patient, which is very, very important point. If you choose an instrument or a device for helping patients, so it has to be safe, and we could prove within this 2-year period that is a very reliable tool using for positioning, which is the EpiGuide and the planning, and that we have a great outcome in patients, reducing their pain, reducing their symptoms, and gaining back their quality of life. And that's what we wish, and that's what is now well documented. And at this point, I would love to thank all my colleagues who dedicated their work in this study, and I would love to thank the Episurf team, Leif and his team, and Frederick for the numbers, helping us throughout this long period. And finally, we achieved this publishing of the CPL study. So this is a great moment for us all. But the best is that we have a very safe and good product which we can work with. So at a typical patient career, I would love to point out for you, this is a 50-year-old male patient. His pain history was to that point 2015 already, since November 2012. It wasn't a sportive guy, but he had a typical career is like arthroscopy in 2013 with microfracturing of the medial femoral condyle and an ACL cell harvesting. So they were already taking cells to do a second surgery and to cover the defects, but he had persisting pain. He had, as all our patients, demonstrate most of the time a good function of the knee, passive free range motion, normal muscle status. Had a one finger test positive. That means the patient points out where he has the pain, and if it's one finger, it's very reliable that it will be only the condyle. So no instability. We look on obviously we look on the ligaments. It's very important to have intact ligaments, or you have to repair those ligaments in addition. And this patient, weight-bearing X-rays again, he's presenting in 2013 very normal X-ray with preserved joint space on the medial, as you can see, medial side, and here the lateral side, and as well at the patellofemoral joint. And if you then look on his X-rays 2 years later, and maybe this is a little bit too specific, but here in this so-called Rosenberg view, you can see that this is a result of the microfracturing here at the condyle, because there we have a bone formation, and there's no cartilage, it's bone. So most of those patients have persisting pain, like this patient had too. And then again, you have seen that a couple of times now. We do the Episurf damage marking of this patient. We try to cover this defect, and you can see this defect is not quite covered by a round implant. And luckily, to that point, we had already an implant which was oversized, twin. So we were aiming for the twin. And typically in those MRI findings, you see that in a T2 mapping, you have the bone edema, which means that the cartilage is not taking over his role in his bumper role to preserve bone pressure, and that's why the bone gets more effusion, gets more pressure, and that's why he turns into white in those MRIs. And you can see it here in the front view as well, and you see that here, this area is where we would love to put the Episealer in. Finally, we are planning on, as I said, the twin, and now you can see the twin is much more and much better covering the defect as a mono would do. And finally, here is the defect in the knee. We have this very small skin incision. We take it as a soft window where we work with bending and stretching the knee during the surgery, so we have a good exposure to the defect zone. We position the epiguide, and now the epiguide, if you look inside the epiguide, you should see the mapping which you have been identifying in the damage report. And after final drilling, you accomplished the situation that you put in the epidummy, which shows you whether you have to do more deepening or less, or you achieved already enough deepening. And then finally you put in the twin, as you can see here, and we kind of tried to get as close as we could so you can see how nicely it fits into the native cartilage. Once more, those pictures. And then finally X-ray. It seems to be a little bit funny because you could say the implant is sticking out a little bit out of the bone. That's true. Why? Because it was put into the cartilage. So the cartilage you cannot see in an X-ray. So it seems that the implant might stick out, but it isn't. It's inlay implant, which is surrounded by native cartilage, and that's why it's not covered completely by bone. 2 years later, you can see it's still there. We don't see any signs of movement to those protheses through the hydroxyapatite coating. We have a very, very safe integration of the implant. We didn't see any loosening of those implants. And again, this patient had quite severe pain up to over 7 before he started, and already 3 months after we did the implantation, he was down with the pain, below 0, below 1, and even after 12 months, developing more life quality, more sports. As you can see on these columns up here, you have here the coast domains, and you can see here the sports domain, and you see here the activity of daily life and the quality of life. And after 12 months, this patient was doing already very, very good. My own experience, and how do I put the Episealer in my office, and which patients deserve it? What we do, and we are one of the centers in Germany at least, where we try to preserve as much of your knee as possible. So if we have the opportunity to put in a partial knee, we will do it. And you see the uni prosthesis is with 415 patients, the prosthesis we put in the most, and then followed by the total with 200, a bicompartmental solution in 30 patients, and a patellofemoral solution, isolated solution in 59. And the Episealer, personally, I did 48, and my colleagues did 3, so we're up to 51 implantations. And you see the mean age at the surgery, and I'm proud because Mr. Evans said that he would love to have totals put in at age of 65 and over. And we are already, the average age of a total in my office is 66.4 years, as you can see here. And then younger patients deserve less arthroplasty, especially the ones with the Episealer. And we're following up those patients, and we see once more, these are the numbers for my personal results of Episealer. We start with rather high pain niveau of 5.2, and then it goes down to 2.6 and even less. And this is already 60 months. This is a small group, so these data might change later to get even better if we have more patients. But you can see the function of those patients. They are getting up even after 24 months. The patients are doing better if the implant is in over a period of 60 months. And it fits into our treatment algorithm. So preserving healthy ligaments, healthy meniscus, that helps our patients, whatever we do. If we do totals, unis, or partials, or small implants, our patients achieve very good function and very good development from the normal beginning. So the Episealer really perfectly fits to what we are doing in preserving the knee joint and making the options for the future possible to change the knee later on if we have problems into a partial solution, or later even in a total. So in summary, we have quite a good experience with partial knee resurfacing, and I think it's a growing segment. But so far we had variable results. Biopoly, hemicap, unicap, we saw that there were revision rates up to 45%. And with Episealer, we have an excellent tool, an excellent implant with another option for an isolated chondral defect of the femoral trochlea or condyle on the lateral medial side. And in our study, we presented, and it's a multi-center study, we presented low failure rates, only 2.5%, and with a very excellent and good clinical improvement. And I think this is all due to the individualized design, because it's accurate. We can perfectly achieve the depth and the location of the defect. We have a perfect planning. And this is that in surgery, the technique and the instruments are working excellent. We had no technical errors in this procedure. And even for the non-trained or not as excellent trained surgeon, this is a very good aid to put in this implant perfectly. Obviously, and that's what we worked on in the CPL study as well, and we work on this topic furthermore, we need a very correct indication. So the worst thing that can happen is to put in a small implant where a big implant is needed, but it's even less good if you put a big implant in a knee where a small implant will do it. Thank you very much.
All right. So thank you, Dr. Holtz, for a very interesting presentation. My name is Anders Hedlund, and it's very nice to meet you, Johannes.
Yes.
Are you ready to take some questions from me?
Yes.
And I thought we could start off by the CPL results from the European multi-center study that was presented this morning. Why is it so important when introducing a new technology in the orthopedic industry, and what could it potentially mean for the Episealer technology, what we saw this morning?
Well, in many cases, you see new products, and new products approach the market in a fast and very speedy way. And I have been taking part in those developments as well. And then all of a sudden there are single reports on less successful treatments, sometimes case reports, and I could name you a number of implants or treatment strategies for knee osteoarthritis, which were then not longer available because single reports of non-successful treatments led to the finished off a very good product or a very good idea. So I think what we did with Episurf in a good academically, but even a very good ethical way, is that we proved with leading surgeons throughout Europe that we have a safe, reliable product. And so now we are in a very good and comfortable situation presenting those data. And it will be not long from now, we can present 3 and 4 year data of this group. And this will even make our work much more comfortable in having and presenting those outcomes of this Episealer.
Right. And in your case, Dr. Holtz, you were an early adopter to the Episealer technology. Why was that in your case? Why did you like about it, even though it was experimental? And what does it take for other colleagues to follow, you would say?
So, as I pointed out during my talk, we are focusing on joint preservation. So I do a lot of ACLs, I do a lot of cartilage repair, and in my opinion, it is even difficult then to have as a solution for osteoarthritis to put in a total, because a total will change the life of a patient, especially when knee function is good, he has high demands, and he's of young age. And for those patients, we have to have solutions that fit them better. And I was dealing with those small implants through my experiences of partial knee replacements already since 2006. And I saw some problems in patients due, on my opinion, due to the lacks in the design. So the design was not patient specific. And so I was really interested in working with the Episealer because it's a patient specific implant. It's imitating the cartilage surface and it has all the properties I needed. We need it for osteochondral defects, and we can decide which depth we are using. So we can plan on 7, 8, 9, 12 millimeters. We are deciding on the depth of the implant, whatever we find below the joint surface. So if we have subchondral cysts, we can cover the subchondral cysts with the implant. And this is not possible with a conventional product, but with a patient-specific product. It's specially made for the patient and for the patient's problem. We can accomplish this, and then we have the 3D mapping and the damage reporting. So this was very unique. It was using new technology to achieve a better result in medical treatment.
Dr. Holst, if we could just leave the patients aside for a sec, from a surgeon point of view, what is the incentives economically and clinically to adopt to a new technology in orthopedics, such as mini metal implants, you would say?
Well, obviously in Germany we have a highly efficient system, but it's very price controlled and it's public controlled. So money-wise, it's important that you have a good outcome to begin with, whatever you do, and then you have to have a reliable result in what you do. So the technique of surgery, is it time-consuming or not? So the Episealer with the Epi-Guide, it's not time-consuming, because from the point of view of surgical time, it's a very short period you're using OR, and OR is very expensive. So you have a small cut, you have a small incision, and then you approach the bone, and as soon as you have approached the knee and the knee surface, you put in the Episealer, fix it with 3 or 4 pins, and then it's fixed, and then you start drilling. It's all already planned and structured. There are no side steps. It's a very precise way of surgery. And finally, you put in the implant, and we haven't seen one mal-implantation. If you put in the Epi-Guide in the right and correct position, you will have a perfect surgical result.
Right. Dr. Holst, I have many more questions, but Paul is giving me sort of the bad eye here. So we have to go ahead. Thank you so much for joining. All the best.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
And next up to present again is Katarina.
So I promised earlier that I would return and tell you a little bit more about our US project. So how do we get our knee implants onto the US market? Well, we were told by the US regulatory body FDA that we will have to take the PMA route for US approval. And that is the toughest route. It will mean a lot of work. But there are some upsides as well, and we'll get back to that. But for the PMA, we need to do an IDE clinical study. So we started that work, and we got the approval from the FDA in late 2018 to initiate the study. And after that, we started the work to really get US clinics on board and to have them ready for the study. The study is actually also performed in Europe, so we call it sometimes our US study, but approximately half of the sites will be in the US and half of the sites in Europe. And the current status is that we have 16 sites for the study, 8 in the US, or 1 is actually in Canada, but 7 in the US, and 8 sites in Europe. And the very first surgery in this IDE study was performed last week. We work very closely with our 2 CRO companies, 1 in the US and 1 in Europe. And we have a lead investigator for the study in Dr. Kevin Plancher from New York. He's very enthusiastic, and it's great to have him on board. The study design is that this is a controlled, randomized study. We will have 180 patients in the study, and it's 2-to-1 randomization towards microfracture. Microfracture is one of these biological treatments that, for example, Professor Emens spoke about earlier. So 2/3 of the patients will get an epithelial knee implant, and 1/3 will get microfracture. We need 2 years follow-up data to submit to the FDA to later on get the market approval. We have some primary endpoints, so the endpoints define what we need to fulfill for the study. And for the endpoints, we have a clinical success. So there are some different ways of how we will measure if the patients are happy with the treatment. And we also have weight-bearing status. So the clinical success will be at 24 months. The weight-bearing status will be checked at 8 weeks. And these endpoints are defined in a way so we have to show non-inferiority in the clinical success compared to microfracture. And that means that we cannot be worse than the microfracture group. We need to be on the same level or better. And when it comes to the weight-bearing status, we shall show superiority. This is our current map for the US sites. And I'm very happy to see this map. We have some great names on it. We have managed to attract some US key opinion leaders. So it's a very good group of surgeons that are now prepared to start the work. And for Europe, we also have many great names. When it comes to the UK, we have 5 sites, and some activities there have been paused a bit due to the COVID-19 situation, but they are working on the preparations and are ready to engage whenever they get allowed to in the study. But meanwhile, we have great progress for the other European sites. We have 2 sites in Germany and 1 in Denmark. And it was actually in Germany that the very first IDE surgery took place last week. And the first US surgery is scheduled to take place shortly. I would like to summarize the IDE study with showing where we are on this timeline. The study has just started, but we are through a long starting distance. And we have done a lot of work when it comes to study design and preparations. But this has also implied that we have got to know some US surgeons, and we have these key opinion leaders that are ready to engage in the study. We have shown them our technology. We have got great feedback and seen their interest in especially our imaging technology. But there's also big interest in the possibly short rehab and short time for the patients to return to their normal active life. And when it comes to this PMA then, and that we have to take the long route, well, it actually gives us a strong position, because the alternative would have been the so-called 510K route, where you show equivalence to another device. By doing that, you get approval for a device that is similar to some other device on the market. What we do is we take the long route to get approval for our unique technology. So the day we get the approval, we will have an approval for something that no one else can do. And meanwhile, we are working on preparations, for example, related to reimbursement in the US. So we will be well prepared the day we get the FDA approval. Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to introduce our next speaker. That's Professor Nick van Dijk. And he's one of the best ankle surgeons in the world. But we will have a short break first with a patient video. Thank you.
Meine Knieprobleme begannen eigentlich bereits im Jahre 2015. Und zwar hatte ich relativ viele Schmerzen im rechten Bein. Da gab es den Moment, wo ich einfach sagen kann, ich bin zwar hart im Nehmen, aber ich habe mir gesagt, so kann es nicht weitergehen und habe dann einen Arzt gesucht und habe in der Episurf Klinik Dr. P.D. Arnold getroffen und wir haben das dann miteinander angeschaut.
Unserem Patienten habe ich in diesem Fall eine Episealer-Behandlung vorgeschlagen, weil sein Problem eigentlich vom Knochen her kommend sich entwickelt hat. Er hatte über ein Jahr ein Problem und Schmerzen und schließlich hat sich das Problem lokalisiert auf noch ein relativ kleines Areal. Eine Zone im Kniegelenk, das bei jedem Schritt belastet wird und das ihm dann entsprechend auch nachvollziehbar und glaubhaft Beschwerden bereitet hat. Eine biologische Lösung bei einem doch leicht älteren Patienten, über 60, bietet sich nicht wirklich an. Und die andere Lösung, eine Teilprothese, das wäre Overkill gewesen, weil es sich um eine lokalisierte Problematik gehandelt hat. Und darum war das kleinere, maßgefertigte Implantat in meinen Augen für unseren Patienten die beste Lösung.
Es war wirklich mühsam die Treppen zu steigen, runterzusteigen wieder. Dann haben wir 2 Hunde zu Hause, die möchten gerne bewegt werden und da war natürlich das immer eine Erschwernis und ich musste mich oftmals durchbeißen und ich war trotz alledem froh, dass man dann diese Operation eigentlich durchgeführt hatte.
Patienten mit Knorpel- und Knochenschäden haben wir bisher von der biologischen Seite her zu behandeln versucht. Da gibt es mehrere Möglichkeiten. Nachteil all dieser Möglichkeiten ist immer, dass die Operation recht aufwendig ist. 1, aber das ist das kleinere Problem. Und 2, dass es monatelang bis zu einem Jahr, und das ist realistisch, dauert, bis der Patient wieder voll belastbar ist. Episealer finde ich ein intelligentes Implantat, wenn es darum geht, dem Patienten eine Lösung zu bieten, wenn biologische Lösungen, also Knorpelersatz zum Beispiel, nicht mehr funktioniert, sei es vom Alter her oder der erste Versuch diesbezüglich hat nicht funktioniert oder er ist vom Alter her und vom Schaden her im Gelenk noch nicht reif für eine Teilprothese oder eine Prothese. Und trotzdem hat er Schmerzen und braucht eine Lösung. Dann kann Episealer eine gute Lösung sein.
Meine Lebensqualität heute hat sich wirklich nur verbessert. Und heute habe ich keine Einschränkungen mehr. Ich kann hochsteigen, ich kann runtersteigen. Ich habe wieder Gewicht verloren, habe wieder 10 Kilo Gewicht verloren, wenn ich wieder Sport machen kann. Und ich fühle mich wirklich wohl und bin so dankbar, dass man das auf diesem Wege lösen konnte.
Hello from France. I'm surrounded here by COVID. Normally I'm in Amsterdam. I was the head of department of the Academic Medical Center, and currently I'm working in Madrid and Porto, where I'm the head of the ankle unit of the FIFA Medical Center of Excellence. And it's a pleasure to talk to you today about an exciting project, which is the Episealer. And I will show you in my next slide, if I can make it work to the next slide. Yes. I will show you a typical agenda which I use when I instruct surgeons all over Europe to tell them about the Episealer, the indication, and the surgical technique. And I will use the same agenda, although I will explain it to you in layman terms. But I will, in my introduction, first tell you why we should implant an Episealer. And if you talk about why, then we have to define the problem. What's the problem? Which is the typical patient in which we implant an Episealer. Of course, there's other solutions to the pathology, to an osteochondral defect, and I will talk about those solutions. Then about the first generation metal implant and the second generation metal implant, which is the Episealer. I'll talk about the indication for the Episealer, the preoperative planning, about the toolkit, and obviously I will not go into detail on the surgical technique, but I will just tell you some of the highlights in order to make clear why and how this Episealer will find its place in the surgical treatment of these patients. And then we will end with some question and answers. So first to the problem, and I'll show you this picture here on the left, which is the cross-section of the ankle joint, and you see that the ankle joint is very congruent. It's much more congruent than other joints. In fact, it's the most congruent joint in the human body, and it has some implications for the treatment of cartilage problems. So how do these problems occur? And this is the typical trauma that happens very, very frequent. It's the most frequent injury in the human body. And what happens is that there is a rupture of the ligaments on the outside, but at the same time there is compression on the inside of the joint. And here you see schematically what happens. You see that the talus, which is this bluish bone that I will explain why I colored the cartilage blue in a moment. And you see that it twists in the box, which is formed by the bones of the ankle joint, and that some problem with the cartilage can occur. So the cartilage is in this picture, this white layer which covers the bone. This is the cartilage, and here you see this layer of cartilage. On the opposite side is also cartilage, and that's why the joint can move. And here you see such a localized lesion which can occur after such a trauma. It's not only the cartilage that is damaged, but also the bone underneath, and that's the key to the solution. And I will talk about that in this presentation, that it's not just the cartilage that we have to try to repair or replace, but it's specifically the subchondral bone, the bone underneath, which is the problem. And this is how a CT scan could look like. This is like a cystic lesion underneath the cartilage, so that would be here in the bone, but it can also look like a sort of fragment with a sort of cyst below. It has different variety of presentations on the CT scan. And when we would make an MRI, because there's 3 varieties that you can make the CT scan, you can make an MRI, and this is a normal X-ray, and here you see on the normal X-ray what is the problem. On an MRI, you see also the bones, but it's mainly for the soft tissues, the tendons, the cartilage. But what you see, and which is important, you see this white area. White on this image means water, and there should not be water. The bone should be black, and this water is the reason for the pain that occurs in these osteochondral defects. Osteo, the bone, chondral, the cartilage. In these defects, these localized defects, the bone is the problem. So what's the purpose of the treatment? If we have a patient with such a localized lesion, what is the purpose of the treatment? And the purpose is twofold. To prevent osteoarthritis. What is osteoarthritis? That is degeneration. That is degeneration of the cartilage goes on and on and on, and that the complete joint goes into a degeneration into an osteoarthritic joint. However, we know from the literature that the natural history of these localized defects is very benign. And if you have a typical defect, which is about 1 centimeter in 90–95% of the cases, they will not go into osteoarthritis. So the main reason to treat is to resolve the symptoms. And what are the symptoms of the patients on the long term? It is pain, deep ankle pain on walking. And the reason for the pain is not in the cartilage, because the cartilage has no nerves. So the pain does not come from the cartilage, the pain comes from the nerve endings in the bone underneath the cartilage. So from the bone here, and here we see that why the bone is irritated, because of this water under pressure, and I will explain that to you in a minute. So the bone is the key to the solution. And here a comparison of a knee joint, which is less congruent. There is some contact areas, and when you walk, the water in the cartilage, and the reason why I colored the cartilage blue is because 75% of the cartilage is water. So we all walk on water, 2 layers of water, and on compression, on walking, the cartilage squeezes, compresses, and the water goes into the joint space, and in unloading, the water goes back like a sort of sponge into the cartilage. The ankle joint being the most congruent joint in the body, on walking, the cartilage compresses, but now the water stays into the cartilage. That's why the compression of the cartilage is much less than in, for example, the knee joint. That was the physiologic situation. Now to the pathologic situation, the situation in which we have a localized defect, in which the cartilage might be swollen. There is some defect, as you see, in the bone underneath. So now what happens? We know that 75% is water. Now on every step of walking, the water is compressed into the bone. And that's why we see this water, this white on the MRI, which I explained to you before. The reason for it is the water that is compressed as a sponge into the bone. And on the long term, this leads to high pressures, to dissolving of the bone. And this is the reason why in congruent joints you find these cystic lesions in the joint on the area where is the damage in the cartilage. And the nerve endings, which are colored red, as you see here, the nerve endings detect this pressure, and that's the reason why these patients have pain, deep ankle pain on walking. So if we then look at the solutions in the literature, and there's many solutions, but the main solutions with the good results are the ones I colored orange. Excision curetized bone marrow stimulation, and you see here on the right what I mean with that. You have the defect, like you see here. You take it away up till the healthy bone. You make small openings, and the stem cells from the healthy bone underneath enter the defect and fill the defect with new bone and cartilage. And that's a very simple method, but a very effective method, as you can see, with 84% of good, excellent results. Oh, it's an osteogonal transplant. What is it? You have the defect and you take a transplant bone and cartilage from, for example, the knee joint, mainly the knee joint. But then you take bone and cartilage from a healthy joint, and in some 15 to 20%, these patients can have pain in the knee afterwards. But for the ankle, it is successful. But similar as to the excision curetized bone marrow stimulation. You see that new cartilage, and there have been many researchers concentrate on cartilage, growing cartilage, and you read You read it almost daily in the newspapers that there's new research being done, but you see, we have not been able the last 20 years to really make that to a successful treatment. Why? Because the pain is in the bone and not in the cartilage. So it's nice to have nice cartilage, but you also have to treat the bone. Retrograde drilling, what does it mean? You come from the other side, you go to the cyst, and you hope that the defect heals. And it does. If you have a large cystic lesion, it is a good treatment. Fixation, and you see it here on the right, is a good treatment if you have a large lesion in which the bone and the cartilage are relatively intact, then it is a good treatment for primary lesions. The size of the lesion matters. If you have a lesion of 10 millimeter, like this, a small lesion, then this debridement bone marrow stimulation is an effective treatment, as I showed you in the last slide. However, if you have a larger lesion, like a 15 millimeter lesion, and you would treat with this simple measure, which has good results, then there is a problem. Why is there a problem? Initially, this will fill, similar as to this defect. However, now on walking, the pressure is on the edge of the healthy cartilage. And you see, 1 year later, in this case, you see a new cyst, not under the defect that we created, but under the healthy cartilage. And this means that the joint will degenerate on the long term. To show it schematically in this drawing, a small size defect, this is the defect, you take it away, you drill in order to get the filling of the stem cells. So it will fill with a blood clot. The stem cells will transform in bone and cartilage, and this is then the situation, and you have, in general, a happy patient. However, in this large defect, if you do the same, initially it's okay, because it will fill, but now the pressure is on the edge, and the situation will change. There will be pressure on the edge, will lead to cystic lesions like we saw in this patient. And when this continues, you get more cystic lesions, more pressure also on the other sides of the joint. And this will then be the end situation. And here you see it in an X-ray, and you see that the joint is destroyed. So what does the Episealer do? The Episealer prevents this, this edge loading. So if you have the Episealer, which should not be to the level of the original cartilage because of the compression. So now if we start walking, this is what happens, and the Episealer will help to offload the pressure on the edge of the joint. So this is basically what the Episealer does. And this was the reason some 12 years ago to develop a metal implant, the first generation metal implant, which you see here. And I was involved in this implant, and I implanted between 2008 and 2017 52 patients. We published this 2 years ago, the results of this study, and the patients were happy. 80% indicated they would undergo the surgery again, and they would recommend the surgery to another patient. Meantime to return of sport was 4 months. 84% resumed sport activities, 90% work activities. So it was a good solution. However, there were 24 reoperations. I will talk about the technique a little later, but if you want to implant this device, whether it is this device or the Episealer, you have to break the ankle, a surgical break. Here you have to break it in order to get access to it, and then in the end you fix it, the fracture basically that you make in order to implant it, with 2 screws. So we removed the screws because they were giving some symptoms. It's a minor procedure nevertheless, some impingements. I will not go into detail, but arthrodesis, which means you fuse the joint, which is a sort of end situation, was in three patients, which means a survival rate of about 94%, which is quite good. However, there are some flaws in this technique, and the Episealer overcomes these flaws. And the first thing which is important is the access. I told you about this osteotomy, this break that you have to do. It's called an osteotomy. It is very imprecise because there was no, it was just eyeballing of the surgeon to get to the right position in the ankle joint. If you break the ankle here, you cannot implant it. If you break it here, you have also difficulty for the implantation. So to have a precise osteotomy is important. The size of the implant in this first generation, they were off the shelf. There were 12 sizes to choose from. So it never fitted exactly because every patient is different. And it's difficult to measure the size exactly during the surgery. The guiding instruments were also eyeballing during the surgery, and then it depends on the quality of the surgeon if it's placed correctly. The size of this screw is quite bulky, so you lose quite a lot of bone, which is not an advantage for a future procedure. And there was only an implant available for this part of the joint, not from the other part of the joint. So this was the reason for Episurf to develop the Episealer. And now there is a guiding instrument which is patient specific. So it's made for the patient, so you exactly make your cut through the bone at the right location. The size of the implant, it is tailor-made for the patient. So there is just this implant made for the patient, exactly fitting the patient. The guiding instrument is also made specific for the patient. So there cannot be any mistake for the implantation. There's not a big screw. It is a smaller amount of bone that we lose, and there is an implant also available for the outside of the ankle, not only for the inside. So the indication, the Episealer is intended for patients with a localized defect. Localized defect meaning a defect on one side of the joint, not on the opposite side, not multiple defects, just a defect in the joint, age between 18 and 65. That is the typical patient for an Episealer. So as to the pre-surgical planning, here you see such a, on the right you see such a CT scan which is made from the patient, and in green you see the defect. Here you see the MRI. If you go through the MRI, now here we see this water white, as I explained to you before. Here it is the area of the defect. And in this way, you can place the Episealer exactly tailor-made on the location of the defect. The surgeon gets this report. This is the instrument which is also made specific for the patient in order to place the Episealer in the correct location. And here you see this guiding instrument, the guiding instrument which is patient specific. Here is the saw that goes through. Here you see the saw blade in order to make this osteotomy, this cut through the bone, in order to get this part of the bone away and thus get access to the talus. You also see those two holes. It is for the screws that we have to place later. So you already drill. So everything is prepared to make anatomical reduction possible after the surgery of this osteotomy. So this is very practical, and it can also be used for all other indications in which you have to get access to the ankle joint. So this guiding instrument itself is already very handy for any surgeon, for any surgery to the ankle joint. And here you see the device in order to make the implant. Here you see the implant in place, the tailor-made implant. And this is the device that fits exactly to the anatomy of the patients. So here you see the toolkit, which is basically simple. The tailor's osteotomy guide on the right, the AP guide for the implant itself. And you see there's not a lot of instruments that are needed for this tailor-made prosthesis. So if you have a defect, and I will not show you the video, but just to show you the incision that we will be making here through the skin, and here is the bone underneath through which we have to do this osteotomy in order to get access. Here we placed the guide. Here you see it's white, here it's green, but it's the same guide in order to make the cut through the bone in order to access the talus, access the bone here to do the implant. Here you see the break has been made. On the outside of the joint, we don't have to break it. We just can bring the talus forward, as you see with this device in which you can bring it forward. You just take off the ligaments, which you will bring back at the end of the procedure. And then you see you have a lot of space in order to place here the AP sealer. Here is the AP guide in place. You see we have a lot of space in order to implant the AP sealer. Here you see the AP sealer which goes in place. And then at the end, these are the two pre-drilled holes in order to get the bone back together. Here you see they're back together with two screws. And that's the end situation of the procedure. So we are currently started with a study, feasibility study with multiple centers, and obviously we will have feedback from the users, from all the users, which will help us to improve there where needed this procedure. And that finishes my presentation. So Anders, are there any questions?
Hello, Professor van Dijk. Thank you for an interesting presentation. Are you ready to take some questions from my side?
Yes, go ahead. It's a pleasure.
So could you just describe the typical patient for this product?
The typical patient is, I would say, middle-aged male or female, age between, let's say, 30 and 65, that wants to live a normal life and that has pain that is caused by a localized osteochondral defect, whether it be on the inside or on the outside of the joint. That doesn't matter.
Okay. And is it an athlete, you would say? Is it a sports person typically?
Well, these osteochondral defects, they happen a lot. As I showed you in my slide, that it's the most occurring trauma to not only in athletes, but if we look at the first 8 departments in all over the world, the most frequent injury is twisted ankle. And all these, well, not all these ankles, 65% have cartilage damage. It doesn't mean that all these 65% of patients will develop these complaints on the long term. Fortunately not, but there is quite an extensive number of patients that will develop these symptoms. And in athletes, it's more prominent probably than in normal patients because they make more use of their ankle. And obviously it is more apparent in the ankle and in the knee joint because of the weight bearing. It's less prominent in other joints like the shoulder or the elbow or the wrist because the less load.
Right. And can you just emphasize why is the episealer talus needed?
Well, because if you have a large defect, as I showed you in the presentation, then there is not a lot of options. The best option is this OATS, this transplant of bone and cartilage, and you have to harvest it somewhere in the body. And the only place where it is harvested nowadays, 99% of cases, I would say, is from the knee. And we are not, there is no cartilage and bone and cartilage that is not used. So you always have to take some healthy cartilage, which poses the risk that there will be complaints of this donor site. And indeed, this happens in about 20% of patients. And it's not nice that you have a patient with an ankle problem and you convert him into a patient with a knee problem. So that's always very tricky, I would say, to do this osteochondral transplant. And obviously, it is much more interesting to have an implant like the Episealer, which you don't need to harvest healthy cartilage. I mean, you must see it as a problem with your tooth, and you have a hole in your tooth, and you replace it with something that fits exactly like the Episealer, instead of taking some healthy part of the body and putting it into your tooth.
Right. How many ankle patients do you think at this stage you could potentially treat a year with episealer talus, and what ultimately drives a change in the clinical practice in this segment?
I would say that obviously with a new procedure you start with the difficult cases. So I treat probably some 40 patients a year with osteochondral defects in the ankle, and probably at this moment, yes, about 25%, some 10 out of the 40 will be an excellent indication. And as we gain more knowledge and we have clinical data, then this percentage certainly will go up. And maybe in the future we will do all osteochondral defects if it shows to be better than the primary treatment, which is debridement and bone marrow stimulation. Because although the result of the bone marrow stimulation, as I showed you, is good, 85% good excellent result, still this cartilage and bone is not doesn't have the quality of the primary cartilage. It's different cartilage. So maybe in the future we will implant many more of these localized implants, metal implants like the Episealer.
On a personal note, I am a big sports fan, and I know that you have treated some of the best football players or soccer players in the world. What can you tell us about that part of your professional career?
Well, it's a very typical group of patients, and a very rewarding group of patients, because if you treat an athlete, and whether it's a professional soccer player or it is a ballet dancer, the nice thing is that they want to go back as soon as possible. I mean, if they come to you on your consultation, the only question they ask, when can I go back to sports? That's the single question. And so they drive you to the limit to shorten the period of rehabilitation. And what is nice about this group is that you see them back on the field, so you see if your surgery failed, yes or no. You see a ballet dancer, when I go on the stage, I see if he puts the weight equally on the left and on the right ankle. So it's a very, I find it very nice to work with them. They are very eager to return and with high demands. So yeah, I have always been very happy with this special group of patients to treat them.
Professor Van Dijk, we're running out of time. Thank you for this interesting presentation, and bye for now.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Congratulations, great talk, and thank you for the introduction of the Talos project. And I'm glad and I'm honored to present the first cases we've done. And the first case is actually done in 2016 by Leif, Ruud, and myself. And back then it's a 30-year-old male patient with a pain of history of ankle sprain after August 2014, and did lots of sport activities before, including soccer. And there was an OATS procedure, so an osteochondral transfer, which was just explained what it is, to the medial talus in October 2014 with persisting pain. And then in the MRI and follow-up in February 2015, it showed some chondral cysts. And this is a situation where we can say that the biological repair has failed. Thank you for the introduction of the Talos project. And I have to turn that down. So basically what we transfer the knowledge from, so Episurf medical transferred the knowledge from the Epi sealer of the knee to the ankle. And we performed in this patient a damage marking based on MRI and CT findings, identified the defect again. And then as we did it in the knee, there was a Epi guide for the exact implantation produced. And then finally we did this on 3rd of May in 2016, so it's 4 years ago. And here you see the approach. It's you have to do the first thing you have to do to approach the ankle, because it's such a narrow joint. You have to get more space for the approach. And what you do is basically an osteotomy. So you get a little bit of a bone of the tibia, of the medial tibia, distal tibia, you get away. And this is freehand. And this has already changed to nowadays, this transfer of knowledge. So we are using now the Epi guides even to do the osteotomy, which will be much safer and reliable in the approach to the joint as we did here. And then the same procedure we did in the knee, the deepening to fit the implant. And here's the implant, and it's definitely a different change because it's a talus dome, and it's dome shaped and imitating perfectly the talus shoulder, how we call it. And it's stepped down, again, fits to the defect. And here, this is an arthroscopic view. So this is sort of an eye view. And you can see how perfectly it fits. And even though it's a small implant, it covers quite a bit of surface of the talus. And here you can see with this arthroscopic view how nice a congruency is achieved before we close the osteotomy, before we put the ankle back in position. And here you can see the X-ray after the surgery where we have used the screws only to put the ankle back in position. And that was made in 2016 with Leif and my personal assistant. And here you can see the mobility test only a few weeks later. And you can see patient achieves very soon after the surgery full range of motion. He can do it by himself. This is a very normal ankle motion. There's no loss of range of motion. It has all flexibility, as you can see here in that testing. This is a normal X-ray. Afterwards, you see the implant. It's covering quite a bit of the talus, as you can see. And as soon as the ankle is healed, the medial ankle, you can take out the screws. And what we did using this opportunity, taking out the screws, we take another arthroscopic view of the joint. And now you can see the incorporation of the implant, which is very nicely achieved in this patient. And you do see no signs of wear on the tibial side. So this is a 12 o'clock position. You can underlook the tibia and you don't see any kind of wear or progressive disease of this patient. And so we took out the screws, then you're rid of the screws and you see that the ankle is in a nice position. And this is really great. You see the patient here in the VAS, so visual analog scale, starting at 7. So this is 10 is presenting the highest he can cross. And so he presented 7. After 3 months, he was down to 3. After 6 months, almost no pain. And he was doing this over the last 3 years. We are missing the 4-year data because we are asking it at 5 years again. And if you can see it here, this is the course, as you see, its function, its symptoms, its pain, its sports, and its quality of life. And his quality of life was really a disaster because you can see here, you can see that the error is really on the left side. And then if you focus on 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24, and 3 years, you can almost see that he's right on the target. He's right where we want people to be. And now you see very amazing pictures. And you have the tone.
Schneller.
And the girl says, schneller means faster.
Langsamer.
Yeah, slower. And he can kick. He's an amateur soccer player, but still he's kicking again. And so we're very glad of this. And he hits a ball like a normal person. And then if you see the movement right here, he can do all kinds of procedures he can do, side steps.
Yeah.
This is a very normal behavior. You couldn't tell which ankle was injured in this patient. And he's a car engineer in his real life. So there he has some stress for the ankle as well. So we're very satisfied with this patient. And then the patients now, where we have achieved the CE marketing, and it's Nick and myself doing now the preparation. I was very glad that Nick accompanied us in the surgery. And here you see, and that's what I wanted to point it out, this is now the EPI guide for the osteotomy. So there's nothing reliable. It's very reliable, and it's not the surgeon who is doing here the job. It's the planning, and it's a precise planning, and it's very safe because you even measure the depth of the saw blade, so you cannot hurt the native cartilage, which is right behind the ankle, which you are taking off here to get an exposure to the ankle. And same patient again, you see now in the x-rays after the surgery that you not even see where we have been doing the osteotomy. And this is right, this picture is right done after the surgery. So this is a very nice additional option due to the use of EPI guides within the procedure, making the procedure more precise, more safe for the patient. And this patient now on the lateral side, you don't have to do an osteotomy, because the bone is not in your way, and you approach again this very narrow ankle, position the EPI guide, and then the same procedure as you have seen before, and as you have seen in the knee. You have to spread the ankle. You use a Hintermann, that's a special device you're using here, so you can expose the drill, and then you use pre-drilling. And after you have the pre-drilling, you have a centered position of what you're doing now. Now you're doing the final drilling. And now you do the 0.2 millimeter deepening of the implant bed. So finally you end up with the position of the implant. The dummy helps you to estimate whether you're deep enough or not before you remove the EPI guide. And if you're satisfied with this situation, then you'll finally do the implantation. You test it once more with the EPI guide. You put it once more in position. And here you see now the implant bed, and here the implant, the talus dome again on the ankle, now lateral. So this, so we did it on 2 patients on the medial side and 1 patient on the lateral side. And once more, this is the medial patient with the osteotomy on the medial side after 6 weeks. And you see the same patient from the other side after 3 months. And you see the other patient This is the lateral patient. You see here, that's lateral, the fibula. You see here the tibia here, and here you see the lateral implant. And once more, you are putting the implant into the cartilage. So you will see always a little bit sticking it out of the bone. And here again, this is the flexibility of this guy. We tried to the Nike emblem as well. We didn't make it. But if you see here now, the pain score, it's going down. And as soon as we start with more weight bearing after 6 weeks, it's not amazing because they are regaining a little bit more pain or discomfort. But if you look at this, this is the daily life and sports score. And it was really low in both patients, especially in the medial one with 3.2 out of 100 and 18.8 with the lateral one, and regaining this life and sports score up to 53.1 after 3 months and 25. It's always 10 times as on the medial side. So we're very, very pleased with those results again. Nick, once again, thank you very much for your help during these successful, almost successful, we can always say successful surgeries in the talus. So I think we are now approaching a new area of Episealer. And I'm very convinced after having those 3 very satisfied patients that we are on our right way. And thank you very much from Hamburg. Hopefully in Stockholm and everywhere else in the world you're watching us, it's as nice as here.
So thank you very much. Thank you everyone who's been on stage or through WebLink today. Just excellent. I predicted that we will be running over time a little bit, and that prediction seemed to be quite accurate. I will wrap up today now in about 10 minutes, and then we will be joined on stage by our management team and also our founder, Professor Leif Ryd, who I think is quite proud today. So personally, I am a shareholder in Episurf, and I have invested a lot of my money, essentially everything I have. No, not really, but quite a lot. And I ask myself if I believe in the technology, of course. And I also ask myself if this can become a commercial success. And it's a definite yes on both of these questions for me. This slide is important. We've clarified a couple of things today. We have given you a long-term market share target and also timetable for stepwise achievement of that target. We have given you guidance on what you should be looking for during the period up to FDA approval. And that is a substantial revenue growth, expansion of the clinical portfolio, full market access in all target markets, and we want to be the best in the industry, the best the industry has to offer for those particular lesions. And I think the technological presentations you've seen today actually testify to the fact that we can achieve that. We have a global strategy. This has been a bit of a focus on my presentations today. And today, these are the countries where we actually have a presence, either through a distributor, an agent, or a direct sales force. And in these countries, we have, or we are on our way with a clear strategy towards obtaining regulatory approval to sell in those countries. And moving on, there's a lot of countries where you need to perform a higher degree of local regulatory work. And these countries are highlighted on this map. As I mentioned initially, just because you have a CE mark doesn't mean you can sell everywhere. And this is work that's now ongoing in the countries that you're looking at here. And these are the countries where we have IP in one way or another, and in most of them, it's a pretty sizable IP position. So all in all, we think the geographical thinking actually makes sense. We have a strategy. We can't go everywhere at the same time, but we're trying to do this thoughtfully and with a great strategy in mind. And everything starts with the great clinical results that you have seen today. Without that, we're nothing. And when we enter a new market, we of course need to consider the regulatory considerations, and also if you have any particular national regulatory considerations. Again, you can look at the European Union, but it's often quite individually there are quite individual regulations in each country. And following that, the reimbursement situation, and that landscape is even more individualized between the countries. So this is something you have to focus on. And this is also something, also a matter or a topic that we will address even more tomorrow than yesterday because of the generation of clinical evidence. This is not something you can navigate through without good data for your device. And the next step, key opinion leader strategy. We are working with some of the best names that we can imagine. We have met them today. We're so happy for that. And we have seen that the peer-to-peer marketing is probably the most efficient way of marketing a new device in the early days. And after that, when the surgeon community knows about the device, we can expand our marketing. And when that is done and we have a broader group of users, we can also market to patients, because patients are very, very aware today. They are Googling. They are not satisfied with being told to wait. And they will be receptive to great patient marketing from the Episurf team, where and when we can do that. So we're thinking about the business model. What are we doing forward? We have two considerations, the manufacturing part and the distribution part. And these illustrations now are very simplified to the reality, but nevertheless make sense. So first of all, on the manufacturing side, we have to produce the actual implant and surgical guides, etc. But also, as you've seen today, there's a great and significant software machine behind that. And on the distribution, we have various options. And today, this is what it looks like. So we are focusing 100% on the software side of things. We're doing some of the packaging and shipping in the company as well. But software is really where our expertise is. And we have a direct sales force, and we have a distributor model. We just started with a few countries. And in our strategy, we are expecting, for example, the US market to be a mix of those two, where the independent distributor networks are important. But in the future, we can also foresee a scenario where we are focusing more or less 100% on the software side of things, and we supply to industry giants, companies with bigger sales forces, and also companies that already have a manufacturing capacity. We can be a software company developing to those companies. It's a less capital-intensive business, but in our business scenario analysis, it can be a really attractive business case. And on the software side of things, I'm actually very proud, and this is a big shout out to the office here in Stockholm. So there's a lot of buzz about AI these days, and we are, I don't know if I should say one of the few, but we are a company that's actually using AI daily in the process of putting devices in the human body. Image segmentation is something that everyone in the industry does. And previously, we've been using an external supplier for image segmentation, and this is the process where you simply look at an X-ray or an MRI image, and you assign a label, whether it's bone or cartilage or whatever it is. You need to do that for surgical planning, and you know that in orthopedics today, computer-assisted pre-surgical planning, that's a hot topic. Everyone does it. So image segmentation, previously, that took a couple of days for us externally, and we had a high fixed cost for each single case. There is one way you can do it internally yourself. Each case estimated maybe 4 hours of manual work, and you simply sit with a computer mouse and you paint on the MRI and say what it is. This is Episurf Medical today. 30 seconds, machine learning, in-house AI-based segmentation. This is impressive. So that gives you a little bit better understanding of where the software investments have gone in the recent years. And we are fully capable of executing all of the steps within the software side of things. The production as such, we don't estimate that to be particularly difficult. But we haven't invested in any machinery yet, but we are likely to do that if we go for a model where we do most of the things ourselves. So we are targeting a gross margin of about 75 to 80% over time. And looking at our market penetration targets of about 30%, this means that we are profitable from just below 1% market penetration. And that is what we are going for as a first step. And the biggest part in the production chain is the customization of the actual implant. And that's where we have the biggest gain once we decide to produce in-house. So I will round off, and who doesn't love a dog? And focusing on the very near future, we are looking forward to additional clinical publications, and they are mentioned here. We had the big European study, obviously accepted for publication, as communicated this morning. But there's a lot more, and we expect and hope more or less all of this to happen during 2020. So this is an important year, and thank you very much. Now I would like to welcome my colleagues on stage. So come. They can also.
We are live, and I am still Anders, and I will be hosting this Q&A session with the management team, 3 of them, the founder Leif Ryd, and we have also Johannes with us. So it's been an interesting few hours, but this day really started this morning, and I want to ask each one of you the results that has been now accepted. Can you just give us your own flavor to them from your own, and what your own personal feelings, starting from the left? Short answers, please.
It's a big difference to have this material. We had 11 patients in peer-reviewed material until now. The difference between 11 and 91, just make the mathematics. We have the evidence to show that this works now.
Katarina?
Yes, and I really like this milestone because this has been discussed so much throughout the years. We need to get the data out, and it's always been something for the future. One day we will have it published, but we are there.
I think I'll leave it to Paul and then Leif.
That's wise. I think there will be a before and after when summarizing the Episurf history at some point in time. This was a very important milestone.
And Leif, maybe the proudest one in the room. If Fredrik is the most happiest one, you are the proudest one.
This is it's really very satisfactory, and I think that these results that we show that was accepted for publication now, they are as good as any other technology that you can use to treat these kind of patients. So we are second to none, really.
Second to none.
Feels very good.
Johannes, we have already talked about the multi-center study. Is there anything you want to add at this point?
Well, I think we are all very happy today, and to have once more have a safe and reliable product. We count on, our patients count on. We have another treatment option. It's a great day since the data are accepted even for a wider community of orthopedic surgeons, and it's great to a little bit celebrate maybe today.
Okay, celebrate.
We will.
So Fredrik and Johannes, what is the next step in this very study? What are you doing right here, right now? So we learned this morning that the manuscript has been accepted for publication. What is next?
Yeah, should I start? We of course wait to have it available, and we hopefully will see it within a month out online. And then we can use it in our marketing. Until then, we go and prepare. And next step, Johannes mentioned here that more mid and long-term data to collect and publish. That's the next focus.
Going forward, you know, we talk a lot about the clinical evidence, and I especially. What do you look forward to the most, going from here?
Well, all activities we can take, where we can take action now, go out and we have the evidence, we have the backup. The entire sales force can go out, see new potential customers, and be able to prove what we internally know works. But now we have the evidence in a peer-reviewed paper as well.
Yeah, I'm still with the clinical evidence. You got your first peer review data back in 2017, and now it will possibly then come 3 years later. And I would be happy if you could join this discussion, Johannes, as well. For a small company, how much can you really control the clinical data in terms of timing and publication and so on? Because that's, in the end, that's what it's all about at this stage.
Well, this study has been managed through this study group led by Dr. Holz here, and we haven't been much in control of it. So we are very, very happy that they decided to do this for us. So again, if I haven't said it to you before, thank you very much. It's
you guys all, and I think from now on we should follow up more patients for a longer period. That will be very interesting, and I'm more than convinced that we will have at the day of 4 years or 5 years, even as good results as we have now. We will have a little bit more of the revisions probably, but it looks like we are doing here very, very well if you compare it with conventional small joint products. And so that's where we're hitting next. And obviously, as I presented, I'm very focused as well on the Talos project, because those patients are doing overwhelmingly good. And as Nick has explained, this is a very specific problem in ankle injuries. And if we have a solution for those patients, then that's a big step again for Episurf.
Right. In your pipeline, do you have any? So I'm nearing the middle age, even though it's hard to believe, and I've been fortunate enough to not have knee pain and yet. Will you be? But I know people that are in pain. Can you really describe what that means, and is it something that you as a company can put a hard value on in terms of health economic data, and is that in your pipeline as well?
Yes, Leif can answer on that one. You've been involved in the
yes. We have actually a manuscript that has been submitted and come back to us with comments that we need more data to support the assumptions. Doing this kind of analysis always involved sort of a peek into the future, and it's always difficult to do that. So you have to have ground data to support your assumptions, and we didn't have that at the time. But now, with this publication and with a long-term publication that we know the results of and that we have communicated, and also our revision data that we have communicated, those provide the basis for the cost utility study, which is very favorable. And with the data that we now have, it will be even more favorable than it was in the original manuscript, because the data proved to be better than we assumed, which is too good to be true, really. So it's looking good.
What is Leif? You as a founder, we talked about that, and I just want to ask you as a founder, Dr. Holz as a clinician, what is actually long-term data in the orthopedics industry?
Yeah.
And where can you make a claim that you have satisfying long-term?
Well, 2 years is the minimum short-term.
And that's what we learned about
That's
today.
what we have. 5 year would be intermediate, and in most cases, a 10-year follow-up is long-term. And obviously, you can follow them even longer, but it gets to be difficult to do that in a cohort study. So then we're talking about the registries, and we all know, I hope, about the Swedish registries. Swedish orthopedics are very proud of these were the first quality registries. And we are entering all these cases that are done in Sweden are done. There are, I believe, some approaching 60 cases that have been performed in Sweden. And they are into the registry. And they will be followed. And as soon as they are revised, they show up as a revision in the Swedish registry among all the other revisions and TUFNIs and UNINIs. And that will give us a lot of credibility, and that is really long-term data. I mean, they report 25-year data now in these registries.
Dr. Hals, is there anything you want to add in terms of long-term data, what it actually means?
Well, as I pointed out in my presentation, we know even from conventional small implants, which have been used for over 15 years now, that in those patients they will work for, I showed you x-rays of a patient almost 10 years without joint space narrowing. So as I told you, I'm very convinced that we have great data at 4 and 5 years, since we didn't have any high numbers of revisions within the first 2 years. And we have been a group of excellent surgeons, but with very various numbers. Some had a few patients treated with the Episurf, some had more. And so if you look now on the group of surgeons who have done a lot of surgeries by numbers, you have to follow them up. And then I think we have a great, even long-term result in those patients. So that's my strong belief.
Right. Okay. So I will cherry pick a bit from this Capital Markets Day, and another topic, of course, of very high importance is the pathway to the US. So, Katarina, you give some status update there. Can you emphasize what is the status there here as of today? You are on track. Is that what you would communicate?
Yes, I mean we have communicated earlier that we can have an approval around 2024, and that's still valid.
What are the main risk hurdles as you see it today, and how do you go about to mitigate them in the ID study itself?
Yes, so there is of course a risk that recruitment of patients is slower than we were hoping for. So we are working on some ways how we can help the surgeons with, for example, marketing activities and so on, how we can provide them with support. So that's one thing we do to minimize that risk.
So so we have had a strange year. So should we be concerned about the recruitment pace given the surroundings?
Well, not yet. We will see, of course, what happens now. Especially, I mentioned the UK. They have paused clinical studies, basically not related to COVID-19. So we have some delay in the UK. However, we are making preparations, and the surgeons can, of course, start collecting patients meanwhile. So it depends on when will the world be okay again. Of course, we also have some delays in the US, that there are states that are heavily influenced by COVID-19, but we're not worried yet.
I think it's important to mention that I think we went into 2020 with a bit of air in that timetable anyway. And of course, that has been compressed due to COVID. And we also, I think, Katarina's a bit careful here, and I think that's wise, because we shouldn't draw too big conclusions yet, because we've only had 2 sites activated in the US over the summer. And the COVID situation there, I mean, I don't need to tell anyone about that, but what we hear from our customers over there, it's that it's been terrible in the clinics. And in Germany, they just started, and in Denmark, we hope to see the first case soon. So the important thing is, like any time we go into a new market or we find a new customer, the first case is always the hardest, but then It usually works pretty well, and there will be, as in any clinical trial, I guess, a pretty big marketing machine around that to drive patients as well. So let's follow up on this one. Super priority. We are extremely humble, and the major risk, I would say, is time, because we know that the results that we are about to generate, we have done that in Europe on more difficult cases. So discipline and just a lot of energy, and we'll fix this.
In terms of the pathway to the US, it is a long road. What will you be able to regularly communicate to the market along the way, and what are the major inflection points that you can share?
So what we have said is we will of course provide recruitment updates. I don't think we have given a specific schedule for that. But what we have said is that we raise money, and in early 22 we will show some early data from this clinical trial. And if that looks good, if that's the first 20 or 70 patients, I don't know, or bigger or smaller, but if that looks good, that is what we will use to then fund the last step into the United States. And I think that's wise, and that's the strategy that we have communicated. Then we would love to make case stories from each individual site, and as Dr. Holtz mentioned, Dr. Holtz's colleague was actually performing the first case last week, but there is a big regulatory framework regarding communication, etc. So it all becomes a bit more complex regarding marketing.
We have talked rather extensively about Talus, Episealer Talus, in today's Capital Markets Day. So when will Episealer Talus be on the US market?
Well, it will probably have to go through the same route. So it is a long way to the US market, but we are looking forward to doing that. And I mean, we're learning so much from this project we're running right now. So I'm happy to take on the Talus project as well.
Yeah. Okay.
But we need some money. If he arranges the money, we're happy to run it.
Yeah, but on that topic, it's most definitely a much smaller study than what we're doing for the knee initial assessment. We don't know yet, but we of course been doing some preliminary analysis. But it's likely that that is a much smaller. Smaller study, and with Professor van Dijk's network, we have great access to a big group of ankle surgeons in the US already. And again, there's nothing like it there, and just being a class 3 product for both the knee and the ankle, together with our IP, creates a significant advantage to anyone else who want to compete. So if we have to do that, a bit painful, a bit long, but definitely worth it.
And there are a lot of synergies between the knee and the ankle, so we can use a lot of the work we have done for the knee, for the ankle as well.
Right. Okay, so Paul, you presented some new, what shall we call, targets really for the day on today's, and we have actually had a question, and then I will follow up. But the question that has come from the audience is really that, and this I had to translate as we speak because it's in Swedish, but basically I think the question is your target of a 30% market share, what does that correspond to in real revenues? How much of revenue?
Yeah, so we've used a price range of 2,500 to 3,000 euros. We would obviously aim higher in every market and charge as well as we can, but to make it realistic, that's probably it, and then that equates to $1 billion market opportunity, slightly above, and 30% of that is simply 330 million.
And so really, how did you come up with those figures? What lies behind them? Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, I would definitely say that these are figures that we've been working with and living with for quite some time now. We're always been asked how big is the market, etc. And so we've done extensive analysis, but the foundation of it all, I would say, is the scientific analysis. What does the literature say on the incidence and prevalence of these injuries? And then the other thing, okay, how does that match what we actually see in reality? If you look at the run rate of the customers who are starting to use the technology more frequently. And now in 2020, these figures really match. So I would say it's based on scientific literature and real life experience, and that's what makes it quite credible, I believe. And again, the competition is limited in this field if you prove to be as good as we hope that the technology is.
Okay. That I can channel check immediately. So I think I turn to Dr. Holtz. What are the true competitors for Episealer?
Basically, none of I know. I pointed out the ones who had the idea of small implants. And for instance, if you look at BioPoly, that's a single radius implant of metal, of titanium and polyethylene. Polyethylene is not it's sort of a unit, but it's plastic. So and it's not imitating cartilage. And how should it be more sufficient in the treatment as a patient-specific implant? So there's no way. And I pointed out it's unpredictable what you do with a conventional radius implant to a patient. And I have patients I treated on both sides with such a conventional small implant. And on one side, the patient pointed out it was a great success, came back for the other side. We did the same procedure. It looked in the X-ray quite the same, or very similar, or identical. And the patient was telling, "Doctor, did you have a bad day that day? Because the second knee is not behaving like the first knee." And after 1 year of complaints, we did a revision on that lady to a partial, and they turned out to be then in fine conditions. So it's unpredictable, and what you do with conventional products in small joints, in a small joint replacement or inlay prosthesis, and that makes a very big difference to Episealer, where you're imitating the cartilage of the patient, the individual cartilage, and I think this is right now. I don't see a product which is even close to that.
And so I don't mean you to speak on behalf of your colleagues, but would you say that from an industry perspective is the highest hope for focal cartilage defects on mini metal implants?
Well, obviously there are two pathways. One pathway is that we find ways how biological repair works in patients which are in the GRAB group, get a little bit older, have not a biological response like a young or growing organism, like an adolescent person or patient. This is one pathway, but this is very steep as well. And all the 30 years I'm out in cartilage repair, all the biological steps has been not fast. I mean, there were slow improvements, small improvements. And what we learned with biological repair as well as with metal repair, we learned the indications, and we learned to find the best or the perfect fit for a patient. And obviously, if you have a patient where biological repair has taken part, and this biological repair didn't work, and you have cysts in the bone stock. Now, what do you do with the cysts? You can fill them up, have another biological repair, but it's most likely that, or the risk that it fails is quite big. And for those patients, it's an ideal implant that you then use metal implant. If you see what I wish, I would love to have a material that is close to cartilage, but we are way far away from that point. I mean, there's nothing like that.
Leif, you have any additional perspectives from the sort of the competitive landscape or with other treatment methods? And we know there's quite a research going on in this
yes,
field, that we can
there's
say.
a lot of research, and there's no doubt that the idea of making new what we call hyaline cartilage, new joint cartilage, it's like a holy grail. That's what everybody wants. And I suppose, including me, but so far after 25 years of trying to find that, we haven't succeeded. And also, and really, there is no data out there of any new treatment modality that could solve that problem. Plus, I believe, and that is one factor, and that is rehabilitation. I mean, with the biological solution of whatever kind you're looking for, it will take 12 to 24 months until that cartilage is mature enough to put to good use. And that's an eternity for a sports fellow. So the fast rehab, basically, a couple of months after an episeal, it's there, the wound is healed, and you can do whatever you want, is a very strong point. Whatever comes out in biology.
Another question from the audience, and I turn it to you, Katarina. And I know you talked about this, but I just quote the question here. I assume that all existing Episurf products are CE marked under MDD. What are Episurf's plans regarding recertification under MDR? Is that something you can re-emphasize?
Yes, so I mentioned the timeline. We need to have certificates under MDR by May 2024. So by that time, we need to have the products certified by our notified body, but we also need to have our quality system, MDR, classified. So we will start with the quality system as a first step, and we will add the products. And for the knee implants, and they will come first, because for the knee implants we will need our own clinical data. And we are happy now that we have clinical data to support our MDR certificate. So we are not in a rush to do this transition. The notified bodies are extremely overloaded still, and there's a lot of pressure on them, so we need to have a dialogue with them and see when is this possible. But we will do this transition well in advance of 2024. And then we have, for the talus implant, we need to make sure we get clinical data in place. So we have an important task there to work on. And when we have the clinical data in place, we can do this transition.
Okay.
Latest 2024.
Yeah. Okay, we are running out of time. I started by going around the clock, basically. Can we just do the same with the folks on stage here, and just what's your personal vision for this company, and what role do you hope to play in this?
Well, to summarize, I look forward to that day. Yeah, actually, a good question. What do we see here? Big question, but we bring people back to an active life, and we will continue to do that.
Okay, I will have to say that I would like to be involved and see how we can get the US population back to a happy and healthy life. So I'm really looking forward to this journey we are doing for the US market.
Leif?
Well, obviously, I hope for this product to prove its long-term viability, both scientifically, clinically, as well as economically. And I think that we are on a very good pathway to do both of those things.
And I think we all agree that you have done your part, Leif.
Yes.
You should be very proud today. Personally, I really like being involved with this, and it's really a nice company to work for. And the big words, we're doing good things, and this technology is here to stay. And I would love to be part of establishing this as a standard, and I think that's good enough.
Right. Okay, and that concludes this Capital Markets Day. If the film camera could just zoom in on Paul, and I give it to you for the final concluding remarks.
Thank you. And that will be quick. So whether it's ankle problems or knee problems, we think that this small company has a lot to offer to the orthopedic industry. And as I hope you have seen today, we're extremely determined to do that together with our customers. So thank you, everyone, my colleagues, Dr. Holtz, Prof. van Dijk, Prof. Eemans, and the Red Eye team here for arranging this with us. And there's a lot to look forward to already in 2020, and our next report is in about a month. Thank you very much for today.